I am Judd Lienhard, former Army Ranger, college linebacker. I've been a strength and performance coach for over 15 years. Let's get into it. On this episode, I sit down with John Welbourn, veteran NFL player with a degree in rhetoric from Berkeley. His combination of a genius and analytical mind, along with his passion for fitness and firsthand knowledge and experience with some of the legends in the fitness industry, have resulted in an amazing story and amazing insights and innovations into the realm of fitness and exercise performance. We cover a lot of very interesting topics, and I had a great time interviewing him. I can't wait to share that with you guys. Let's get going. So I'm sitting here with John Welbourn. You have an amazing backstory, first of all.
Thank you.
10 years in the NFL, background in martial arts, firsthand knowledge and familiarity with some of the most profound minds in our business. I've kind of binged your stuff lately. I had that privilege when we spoke together at Summer Strong to hear you speak, and degree in rhetoric from Berkeley. When you combine a passion for what we do with the mind that you have and the ability to communicate it, you get something kind of special.
Thank you.
I am just beyond grateful that you'd be able to come on this podcast, man. And,
well, thanks for inviting me. I saw you had Bert Sorin on, and I hold Bert in tremendous high esteem.
Same.
What Bert's been able to do with Sorin X, and I always think that one of the greatest things that an individual can do is honor their parents and honor their father. And the fact that his dad started Sorin X and he's been able to kind of take it over and not, fucking auger it in the side of a mountain, but extend it and grow it and really create this amazing company. He's honored his father, and I was really sad to see Pops pass away.
Yeah.
And he was a special individual. We had a really cool relationship. And one of the last times we hung out was at Winter Strong a couple of years ago. He rolled over to me and said, "Hey, I had a dream about you last night." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, we were in a bar. It was
were my pants on? My pants were on, right?
Oh yeah, dude." And he gave me this epic and I was like, "Man." And so I thought it was just kind of funny. So I saw one of the guys and I was like, "Hey, yeah, you talked to Pops?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Has he ever told you he had a dream with you in it?" And he's like, "No, I've never heard that." So I asked 10 different people, and nobody had ever got that line. So I figured I was kind of special that, of all the people that Pops knew, he was ready to go one-on-one in a fist fight in a bar. And all of a sudden I was like, "I'm with you, dude." And I figured that was a good indicator that I'd
Does
led a
Bert
good
know
life.
the story?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh, that's so good.
And the funny part was, I was like, "Is anybody else there?" He's like, "No, Bert wasn't there. Nobody else. It was just me and Pops back to back, ready to fucking duke it out." So
that's awesome.
And then I also am extremely, probably overly observant about everything. And with last time we were at Winter Strong, he kept rolling out with different hats. So every time I saw him, he came out with a different hat. And so I started counting hats, and I'm like, "Pops, I've seen 17 hats." And he's like, "You're the only one that's noticed." And I was really sad to see him pass. So I'm very proud to call Bert a friend, and the guys from Sorin X have been amazing. So yeah.
The thing about Bert, right away, when you talk to somebody, you can tell if it's a genuine human being, and Bert, has a really good soul. I recently went back up there to do some work with him, and I didn't know how good of a business mind he had. He's a very savvy, intuitive business person. And sometimes you don't expect that because he's so laid back and genuine, but I was really impressed with his business acumen the last time I went over. I could just sit with that dude for hours and just pick his brain on business as well as fitness.
So first time I met Bert, CrossFit games that I competed in, which was wild. I'd never really done CrossFit.
How much did you weigh when you did that?
310, 312 pounds.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell how big you are. You played offensive guard and tackle in the NFL for 10 years.
Yeah.
Almost all of it as a starter.
Yeah.
Only not starting when you were injured, had to sit out.
Yeah.
First of all, you played. This is pretty cool because you played for the two teams in the Super Bowl, correct?
Yeah.
And so this will probably air after the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So not to put any pressure on you. Who do you got and why?
I was drafted Andy Reid's first year in Philly, and I really loved playing in Philly. I got in some contract disputes, and then they ended up trading me to the Chiefs, and I was very fortunate to play there for Dick Vermeil. So I have a lot of special memories playing for Philly and also for the Chiefs. At heart, I should have never left Philly. As much as I got to go play with Tony Gonzalez and Priest Holmes and Larry Johnson and Will Shields and some of the best guys. I got invited to play on the best offensive line in pro football with Willie Rofe and Will Shields and Casey Wigman and Brian Waters and Tony Gonzalez and Jason Dunn. I mean, just absolute killers.
You know what's funny? Because you're a little bit older than me, and I remember watching you play as a kid, which is really cool. Because I remember that I was a Chiefs fan because
Yeah.
of Missouri, and it's really I was like, I remember this guy, like, because like even really good offensive linemen sometimes, unless you're a fan, people don't remember. I was like, I remember this dude, and I remember that line and Willie Roaf and all those guys,
Yeah.
and like they were really good, man.
Yeah, so I felt very fortunate to play on it, but, the feeling of playing in Philly, it's almost like living in Gotham City. Like, the way people act and this, it's just, like, there's something about Philly and, like, I grew up in Southern California, went to Berkeley, I get drafted, and to go from, Southern California to Northern California and then move out and live in Philadelphia, like, I might as well have been going to Gotham. I remember flying in and saying, like, "Holy shit, I'm moving to Gotham City." And when you get there, it's like it's as rough and as tumble and edgy and gritty and dirty as you would imagine, and the people are angry and this, and, like, you get there, and it was kinda shocking for the first year.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden, I came in and I was a starter, and you kinda get acclimated and you meet people, and going back to Philly now is like going in and finding, like, an old leather coat, you, like, put it on, you're like, "Oh, this fits great.
that's
I got
awesome.
$5 in my pocket, I'm winning." And, I still, like, snap back into it. I mean, I lived downtown, I lived in Rittenhouse, I moved out to Manayunk, and then ended up buying a house over in Jersey, which was a mistake, I should have never left the city. But,
The cool thing about Philly, though, it's really rough and blue collar, but it's also an epicenter of learning. When
yeah,
you look at all the universities that are packed
yeah,
into that town,
oh, yeah.
it's a weird dichotomy that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's got all these major universities. I mean, Penn. So where I lived, right on 25th and Locust, I had a view of Franklin Field right by the Skook, and I mean, Penn was there. I mean, it is Drexel. It's just a center of learning,
Yeah.
and it's really as George Clinton said, the city of brotherly love. It's got a lot of chocolate with a little bit of white sugar in it. So I loved Philly. I still have a bunch of friends there. So
Yeah.
um, I also really enjoy the story of Saquon Barkley.
Mhm.
The fact that he, went to New York, they brought him down. Nobody's going to pay him. We're not going to pay this guy, and he came in, and it's just been an incredible running back, and they got a great offensive line. So,
Yeah, man, I think his best years definitely could still be ahead of him, believe it or
dude,
not. It's crazy.
there was a couple of years there where running backs were just a dime a dozen.
Mhm.
We'll just plug anybody in, and the kind of the marquee back was dying off, and I was kind of bummed because I like to watch football for the run game.
Yeah, same.
And all of a sudden you bring back, Derrick Henry and you get Saquon Barkley and you bring back these big backs that are marquee backs now, and we just haven't seen it. And now it
Same.
really shows you can throw the ball and you can have a great agile kind of quarterback that can move around the pocket.
Mhm.
But if you have a guy that consistently can put, yardage, 100, 200, I mean, 300-yard games,
Mhm.
I mean, that is a weapon that is indefensible,
I've always thought that a running back's ability to catch the ball is extremely undervalued as well.
especially out of the backfield.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Roger Craig was one of my all-time favorite players, and,
Mhm.
Matt Forte, I was a Bears fan
Yeah.
too. Um,
Oh, yeah.
it
No,
it reminds me a little bit of, like, the tight ends. Remember they say the tight ends were dead? Like,
Mhm.
there's a time when, like, they're like, tight ends are going away,
Mhm.
and then now they come back with a vengeance too.
Well, the NFL is so cyclical.
Yeah.
When I played for the Chiefs, I mean, we had the best tight end in pro football history, Tony Gonzalez. And the reason I say that is Tony could not only catch the ball better than anybody, but his attention to detail. And any time that Tony came over and lined up next to me, I knew we were going to kill people. So when you get into this Travis Kelce debate, Kelce never leaps on the line, and
Mhm.
he has no desire to block anybody.
Mhm.
Tony could not only catch every route, he could block. I mean, you look at a guy like Gronk. Gronk could block, he could hit, he was in tackle. I mean, when you look at like the Mount Rushmore of tight ends,
Mhm.
it's Tony and Gronk, and then you can add a few other people on there.
Yes.
But
I think, the guy in San Francisco is very underrated as well,
dude,
George
Kittle.
Kittle.
Oh
Yeah.
my, he's
He's a fantastic
monster.
blocker. Yeah.
I think he's on there. Not to discount what Kelsey's not. I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean, he's great.
he's amazing in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I do know, having played, and I can the clairvoyance to see how he reacts. He wants nowhere to be near that line of scrimmage. He wants to be split out. He wants to go up. He wants to squat right in the middle of their zone and catch these little
Mhm.
passes, and Mahomes finds him.
Mhm. Andy
So
Reid uses them well too,
oh, he does. So, I think he's a big diva at this point in his career. I mean, he's got the, hottest chick in the game, billionaire Taylor Swift on his arm. I mean, he's in a great position. So I like, but for me, how do I say this without sounding like a jerk? I would love to see Philly win it, just for the fact that there isn't a lot of happiness in
Yeah.
Philly, and they can win it. I think that team is great.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, dude, I just want to watch a competitive Super Bowl. I hate
Exactly.
watching blowouts. I want to see it come down to the last. I want to see the greatest players on the planet stand on the biggest stage and have their greatest day.
Yeah.
And I like to think I'm a fan of humanity in that way. I want to see like the greatest people stand on stage and give the greatest performances, whether it be at Summer Strong. I want to sit there and be wowed by people. Like I want people to do their best. I think in life, at least I've come across this recently. I feel like there's a lot of crab bucket mentality where people, see you up there and they want to see you fail
I don't
because
know.
it's somehow
I feel the same way. I've never understood that. It's always
like
gross to me when people root for people to fail. I'm like,
yeah,
why?
but it makes them feel better. Oh, he's not as good. Like I follow Judd on social media, and now all of a sudden he's got a podcast. It's a bomb. It sucks. I knew it,
Yeah.
and it somehow is some weird thing. Whereas I tune on and I'm excited to see people do great.
You really rarely see those people succeed though, that
No,
have that mentality. The people that don't also root for others to succeed and want to bring up others along with them. I've noticed since I'm kind of fairly new to this, not the training aspect, but the social media, all that.
sure.
Most very successful people will spend time investing in me even though they don't have to, and there's no direct benefit for them at the time. I've been blown away by how many times that has happened, and I'll sit there and I'll be like, this person is gaining nothing from the time they're spending with me, but they're
Mm,
investing in me anyway. And it's really like it's eye opening, how successful people think and that they root for other people.
yeah,
You know. And also, I do root for teams that are from towns that don't seem like they have a lot. I've always rooted for Buffalo for some reason, just 'cause they have
man.
nothing else going on, and,
I so I believe in Josh Allen, right? Like I
mhm.
like the story. Like I'm all in on it. And Sean McDermott was our quality control guy when I was at Philly.
No
He
way.
was Andy Reid's kind of assistant. His job, first job, and I remember he was there. His job was he had to get Andy food, which was like trying to feed a hungry bear. He would come in with like
Dude,
seven.
Andy's coaching tree, like,
It's
oh my
incredible.
god.
Well, yeah, I mean, so Steve Spagnuolo was our DB's coach. Leslie Frazier. You're talking about Ron Rivera. The amount of people, Jim Johnson ran that defense. So the defense that you see those guys run, that you see Spags run, is basically very similar to Jim Johnson's defense. To the point where I can, they're doing blitz. I mean, cover two. I mean, it's what we faced in practice every day.
Wow.
So it was neat to play on that team and to be able to see how these coaches have gone on. But I was rooting for McDermott because I like him,
Yeah.
and the Josh Allen story is a great one. The problem that I saw when he first came out, what I was hoping to see is a chip on his shoulder. I was hoping to see him come out and pissed. And the guy, like, what's amazing to me is for all of Brady's success, I mean, Tom Brady, probably the greatest quarterback,
Mhm.
I mean, greatest football player to ever play. When they use the GOAT, I mean, it's probably LL Cool J coined the term GOAT, and the only other two
Did he
guys,
really? I didn't
yeah,
know that.
yeah,
I love that.
So whenever you hear the GOAT, like LL Cool J's the GOAT.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It
He
seems fitting that LL would cool
Well,
would
it was in a song. He also has the greatest line of any song, which is "Hot sex on a platter." I mean, who the fucking work hot sex on a platter? So I'm a big LL Cool J fan, but he had the GOAT. Michael Jordan, and Tom Brady, the only two guys that I think deserve that.
I agree, but I did see some Montana highlights recently, and I've forgotten how good that guy was too.
Yeah, he was
But,
great.
yeah, but
But the
yeah,
one
I
thing
got
which
you.
is wild is for all of Brady's success, that dude walked in every single day with a chip. It was almost as if he was
Mhm.
driving in. He watched all of that combine like stuff. I mean, he came,
Michael Jordan kinda did too, though, now
dude.
you say it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he had this chip on his shoulder,
yeah,
and Tom was always pissed off, always angry,
yep,
always fiery, and you saw that from him. And
yeah.
I didn't get to. I would have loved to have played at the Patriots for a whole year. I got hurt at the last preseason game, and that was the year Tom actually tore his ACL. So it was obviously not that
You
heartbroken
coulda played
about
with
it.
Matt Castle,
Oh,
man. I
I know, and I know Castle, good dude. But
missed a big opportunity.
the one thing that I noticed about Brady, especially in practice, was like a chip on his shoulder and
Yeah,
like a little bit of fucking anger. And when I saw Josh Allen come out, like I want him to have that chip. I want him to have that fire. I want him to get in people's face. And those first two series were just very lackluster. He looked nervous and this. And it was almost like before he went out for the game, somebody handed him a script and he turned to the last page and it said Travis and Taylor drive off into the sunset.
yeah.
And he knew it. And
He might get to be known as, like, the Peyton Manning to Tom Brady if he and Peyton and, Patrick Mahomes stay in the league long enough together.
yeah,
It might go down because everybody remembers Peyton Manning as the guy that just could never quite beat Tom Brady on a consistent
unless
basis.
he brings his brother in.
Yeah.
And Eli,
He's gotta
Eli,
bring his brother in the 4th
oh my
quarter.
God. And then Eli has the,
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it was like he had the Tom Brady to turn, he sprayed on him. But yeah, Peyton, I was very fortunate to hang out with Peyton a fairly decent amount, when he would come to Phil or come to, New York.
I love that
Um,
guy's personality, man.
he
Just
is
yeah,
as good a dude as
yeah.
what he puts out. So, Brad Scioli, who played D tackle for the Colts, he and Peyton were good friends. So they flew to New York for Peyton to do something with Nike, and it was like a big deal. So I drove up and we got to go like hang out. We went to like dinner that night and ended up going to a Yankees game. So we have this hilarious deal. It's like 2 o'clock on a Monday and we're at the Yankees game. We sit in the stands and Peyton's sitting there and he's wearing a baseball hat. We all sit down and I'm like, dude, this fucking hat looks like, like when they show like the Peanut Man with this little hat, and I'm like, Peyton, they're gonna see us. And he's like, no, we'll be fine, we'll be fine. So we're sitting there, and I like, so when I lived in Clearwater, I lived in Florida when I played for the Eagles in the off season, and my neighbor was David Wells. So I'm pretty sure Wellesley was
The
pitching.
pitch, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. And all of a sudden, we're sitting back there, and we're maybe 20 rows back up from home plate, and all of a sudden, I can see all these people start like kind of rubbernecking and whispering and rubbernecking, and then all of a sudden, they're like turning, and I see Peyton go, "We gotta go!" And literally, we hightailed it out of there. So we had a lot of fun, man. He is as good a dude as what you see out there, and
Yeah.
probably one of the nicest guys I've ever seen. I remember after we played him, we came out to the buses and my dad was there and my dad walked over and he walked over and like he must have talked to my dad for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Just shooting the shit, like
I
talking about
love it when
everything.
people that you would think are extraordinarily busy make time for others.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it always catches my eye and my attention when that happens. They're never too busy, it seems like.
Now Peyton was great. And
Um,
yeah, I mean, just a really, not only a great player, but Tart Glenn, who I played with in college, was their left tackle. So there's a lot of like it's very incestuous because you end up
yeah.
playing with guys and having friends and here and there,
Yeah.
and it was a very neat brotherhood, like an incredible
When
job to have.
when I saw that you were coming on this podcast, like sometimes he's going for 2.5, 3 hours, and I was like, that's not near enough time. Um, I want your backstory, the amount of elbows that you've rubbed, the people who are legends in this field that you've personally. We're talking about Mark Ripito,
Yeah.
Louis Simmons, Charlie Francis, Charles Poliquin, and then lesser known people that you met at an early age that were just like phenomenal and helped guide you. I mean, literally, I could go on for days just getting stories from you. There's a lot of, but at the same time, you've never said anything that I've disagreed with, and the way you say it and are able to communicate it, I think is very special. So I do also want to get to like training.
Mhm.
So
Sure.
I'm a little torn.
Okay. Well,
um,
well, good thing we got a lot of time.
but can we go over your background just
Yeah.
a little bit because you have a pretty cool story about how you got in the NFL and like your
Yeah.
martial arts history and everything like that.
Yeah, no, obviously grew up the youngest of three boys. My brothers and I, grew up in Southern California, doing everything. And when I was about 6 years old, my older brother's probably 5.5, 6 years older than me. He got into a fight with some like, neighborhood bully kind of deal and got his ass kicked. And my dad wasn't really much of a fighter. So, 80s karate kid story style, my dad takes him down to this like martial arts dojo.
Did they teach you the crane?
No. So
Sorry.
that was Okinawan, right? This was Shotokan, Japanese karate.
Okay.
So we go down there and my brother's there probably about, 2 weeks and he comes back and he's like punching my brother and so my dad just like dropped us all off. And so we started doing martial arts and it was old school. It was like wooden floors, katas, kneeling, and like this dude had like a bamboo boken and walk around and beat the shit out of us with it. And I remember telling my mom, I'm like, this guy's hitting us with sticks. And my mom's like, yeah, it's karate. Like, you guys watch that kung fu shit on Sunday. Like, this is what happens. So
Your mom sounds awesome, actually.
yeah, my mom is, she's a handful, still a handful. So I do that for a number of years. And when I was probably 10 or 11, it was about 86 or 87. My dad was always a boxing fan. So his buddies would come over and they used to have this like box thing and they switched it and they could like watch like, pay-per-view fights or back in the day. And we watched Marvis Marvin Hagler versus Tommy Hearns in like the war.
Dude, you got to see them live?
Well, I mean, on TV,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so I was like, probably
man.
10 or 11. They come out and these dudes are wearing short shorts. I mean, they were in phenomenal shape and they stood in the ring and threw punches at each other like I've never seen. I mean, it's probably the greatest fight I've ever seen.
Yeah, probably one of the greatest fights of all time. If you haven't
And
seen
and
it.
at that
Both
moment,
those guys are just
the
legends.
best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I was always a Hagler fan. I mean, he
Yeah.
just like just moves so well, but their ability to stand in the ring and just throw fight. And I just remember thinking like, I don't want to kick anybody anymore. Kicking's stupid. So the problem is that the Y and like all like the boxing stuff was over in San Pedro and I lived in Torrance, which might as well have been like 400 miles. Like there was no way I was getting my mom to drive me.
Yeah.
So the only place that I could ride my bike to was this kickboxing academy that had a ring. So I used to ride my bike over to this place and it was like a John Barrett kickboxing academy. So I started doing the kickboxing stuff. And I was like, hey, I'll do this, but I want to just punch. And the guy's like, well, it's kickboxing. You don't have to kick, you can punch if you want. So that's kind of where I learned
Okay.
and got into the boxing stuff. And then when I got to high school, we started training with a guy named Nono Labontier, who was a boxer and a fighter. And so that was I trained all through high school with him.
He has ties to the Gracies.
Yes.
I've heard you say this
Yeah,
before.
yeah. So he was a guy that the Gracie family brought in to teach horse stand-up fighting. And so his son's an MMA fighter, and so we trained with him. And then when I went to college, obviously go play at Cal. We trained with the Cal boxing team in the off season. And then the guy that I trained in the NFL with, Rafael Ruiz, he did Antonio Tarver's fight prep stuff. So I mean, there was always this like hand in boxing.
Yeah.
And when I went to go play in the offensive line, it just felt a lot like cutting a guy off in the ring.
You know what's really funny is there's correlations in positions in football that the people that are really good at those positions tend to have backgrounds in other sports.
Yeah.
So for quarterback, it would be like a pitcher or a point guard,
Mhm.
right? And the spatial awareness and the timing, not being afraid to like be center stage and have it rest on you. For offensive linemen, it's the skill that I see translate the best is usually hand quickness and balance, which is a lot of boxing background. For tight ends, it tends to be basketball backgrounds. Good D linemen tend to have been wrestlers.
Mhm.
I played with an All-American linebacker in college. It was a great tennis player, and I started to see the similarities of how he moved.
Yeah, lateral
That
movement.
it's just funny how those certain sports tend to translate really well.
Look at tight ends in basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
Tony was an incredible basketball player.
The guy from San Diego,
Yeah, Antonio Gates.
Antonio Gates.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
like
goes
never even
on.
played college football.
Yeah,
So that, for me, one of the first things that my coach always talked about was first meaningful touch. So when you go into a boxing match, like the first meaningful full touch, the guy that like strikes blood first. And I
yeah,
just took that same attitude towards playing offensive line. Like I would set a guy 2/3 inside out, which is in boxing, you never guy square 2/3 inside out, first meaningful touch. And my feet were good.
yeah,
So my whole deal was I would just get into position, and then I would just try to basically fucking put my hands through the guy's heart.
yeah,
And I was very fortunate. What's wild is a lot of this stuff happens and you don't really realize it. And it's until you come on podcasts or somebody asks you these questions that you kind of formulate this and be like, oh shit, that was really impactful. So when I was 14, 15 years old, we trained with this old power lifter guy named George Zangus. So George invented the super suits and the wraps, and he had a company called Marathon Nutrition. And he did the super suits and the wraps for Hatfield and all these, like he was like big into powerlifting. So when we started training, he kept yapping about this thing called compensatory acceleration. As mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. And he mentioned he's like, Fred Hatfield, the greatest power lifter to ever lift, in his generation. Ed Cohn is definitely in there. But for Fred, I mean, the ability to be able to move the bar with violence. And so George was funny. He's like, don't lift weights like old people have sex. Be violent. I want you to try to break these motherfuckers. Like if you go to a commercial gym, I want them to come over and ask you not to break their weights.
yeah,
I want you to put your stamp on or remember them. So whether it be, coming out of the hole on a squat, like trying to, vertical jump this weight off the ground, is mechanical advantage, so does speed, benching,
mhm,
bringing the bar off and trying to like snap this thing.
mhm.
And so all of that was incorporated into my training from day one. So when
Wow,
I
that's
went to,
so you're so like you're
yeah,
to have that level of understanding at that age is so rare.
well, he just coached us to do it.
Wow, that's
And,
crazy.
so when I went to go set on a guy, let's say I went to set when I went to go punch, everything we had been doing was as mechanical advantage increases, so does speed. So I wasn't just trying to put my hands on people, I was trying to put my hands through people.
Mm,
So all of a sudden now I'm setting, and when I went to punch, and, I ended up, scouting reports, like heavy hands, big punch, like, "Don't let this guy get his hands on you."
You
And
know
I
what?
and I
Another
knew when I could get my hands, like, where I needed them, I was athletic enough
yeah,
to be able to bend my knees because I'm a what they call a knee bender.
mhm,
In professional football, there's 2 types of people, there's waist benders and there's knee benders. I was a good knee bender, and I could, like, be able to do some things. I had a unique skill set that they don't necessarily teach, which was the ability to strike with my head and hands and uncoil my hips, but then also rebend.
mm.
Because
I
most
wonder if some of
guys
that came from boxing as well. I mean,
100%.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, just the amount of speed work and heavy bag and all the stuff we did. So, but really that ability to be able to see people move and to be able to see it happen, I was just very lucky in that when things got stressful, everything got slow.
Yeah.
So, that piece, and I don't know how to teach that.
Really good offensive lineman in addition to having really great feet and balance, it's almost this courage that it takes because the guy's literally attacking you, right?
Mhm.
And to sit back and have the patience and attack them back, but wait for the perfect time.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that. A lot of offensive linemen will lunge at the defensive guy because they don't have the courage to wait,
Yeah.
and get him in position. And then I also notice that like throwers tend to make really good offensive and defensive linemen because
Yeah.
they're so used to accelerating the object, like you're talking about through the entire range of
Yeah.
motion.
I mean, compensatory acceleration applies so much to the shot put and the disc.
Yeah.
I did throw the shot put and disc in high school, but I wasn't very good at it. The reason I joined the track team is I wanted to run hurdles. So I had this like weird moment where I was in middle school, and the way we got graded in middle school on PE had to do with these timed runs. So my freshman, or sorry, my sixth grade year, pretty fast got A's, and then all of a sudden I grew. And seventh grade, something was weird, and by the time I got to eighth grade, all of a sudden I was slow, and I started getting C's on
I train
runs.
kids. I see that happen all the
Dude,
time.
it
Yeah.
was the weirdest thing, and I
It's very
remember
frustrating for
oh,
'em.
super
Yeah.
frustrating because now I'm getting C's,
Yeah.
and I was so, humiliated and embarrassed that I was gonna have to go home and give my mom a report card with a C in PE, that I asked the teacher, "Is there anything extra I can do? Like, I can't take home a C in PE. Like, I'll just get chat like, this is just too much to bear." And she said, "Hey, on Fridays, you can do extra credit runs, and I'll just average your score and you'll get an A, but you gotta show up every Friday." So every Friday after school, I just tell my mom, "Hey, can you pick me up later? I gotta study." And then I'd go do these extra credit runs. And I remember telling the teacher, "Is this common? Has this ever happened?" And she goes, "Oh, yeah. But what happens is you go play football next year and you'll lift weights and it all goes away."
Yeah.
And, like, here's this 8th grade, PE teacher, she's, like, gave me a list of all these, football players that, like, had gone through something similar. When they went to go lift, it all went away, which is, inter and intermuscular coordination and rate code. Like, all these things happen when you
All
start
your
lifting weights.
proprioception's off.
Yeah,
Your levers just got a lot longer in a hurry. Your
yeah,
muscles aren't strong enough to move them fast.
yeah,
But I always tell the kids to make them feel better. I'm like, listen, keep getting stronger. Be patient. Keep the intramuscular coordination.
yeah,
And eventually, what's a curse to you now will be a blessing
yeah,
because once you can move a longer lever faster, it can be way faster.
yeah,
Like that. The thing I identified about you though from a young age was when something wasn't perfect or wasn't working, you took steps independently on your own
yeah,
to fix it or seek out somebody that could help you
yeah.
fix it.
I rode my bike to the library and checked out a book on speed, and I was reading this book, and they were, talking about downhill running.
Yeah,
So this
overspeed,
is
yeah.
so well, this is when I was running track, and, I was trying to run hurdles, and, I remember the coach was like, "Hey, you can come run the hurdles, but you gotta throw the shot too," and I'm like, "Done." And so all of a sudden, as I got bigger, I ended up kinda running the hurdles, but I was looking for ways to get faster. And I check out this book, and it talked about downhill running. So I was, like, riding around the neighborhood looking for some 3% grade, not knowing what 3% is. And I remember I finally found this hill, and I'm, like, down there trying to do overspeed stuff, and my buddies are like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Getting faster." So like, I don't know where it comes from, whether it be, shame, desire, like, I don't know where it is, but, like, if I am not good at something or I can't hold the standard that I've created in my mind, then I have to figure out how to do it.
You said something, when I heard you speak at Summer Strong about the willingness to be a novice again and
Yeah,
how people are so hesitant to do that, and it's so true. To go when you get used to being good at a lot of things, it's hard to take a step back and be bad at something again for a while.
yeah.
But
I deal with that every day at jujitsu.
yeah,
I picked up jujitsu about a little over 2 years ago, and, now I'm a two-stripe blue belt, and the guys I train with are absolute killers.
yeah,
The best in the world. You saw the presentation with, Victor and Philippe and those guys.
yeah.
I mean, like absolute killers that train, Shanji Ibero and, Lobato. I mean, these dudes that are just legends. So it's really, it's very deep water to go to. And I have a good skill set, but that skill set for jujitsu is so much exposure base
Yeah.
that even, rolling with, guys and like they have such unique skill sets. So it's very humbling. And like in my mind, I have to continue to realize that like um progression comes from, having, the absence of ego that, every day I have to go in there and realize that these are learning and like what I did before might have given me a skill set, but like that doesn't apply,
Yeah.
and then finding people that are in a similar journey. Like I rolled with a guy yesterday who was dad bod white belt. And, I'm inside control and he keeps turning the wrong way. And finally I kept flattening him. I'm like, dude, you're turning the wrong way. Turn to me, get your frames. And I'm trying to like get him to do this. Cause, like the problem is like when you train people and we do this, like we're always kind of in this coaching thing.
Mhm.
And even though I'm a, crappy two-stripe blue belt, I still understand the concepts.
Mhm.
And so I want people to be good.
Yeah.
And it's
If you're a
funny.
teacher at heart, it's hard to get that out.
Yeah.
You wanna teach, you
Well,
know?
and I've rolled with guys that are just like looking for quick submissions on shitty dudes. And I'm like, dude, there is no honor in submitting somebody that doesn't know how to fight
Yeah.
back. So like coming in and just like, getting cheap submissions on crappy white belts, like that's zero honor to me. And so,
That's you talk about ego.
yeah.
Ego will get in the way, you getting better.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I've always had a lot of pride about who I am and what I do. And what was really kind of interesting when you think about it is when I played in the NFL, the name on the back of my jersey, Welbourn, wasn't just my name. It's my dad's name. It's my brother's names. It's my son's names. It's my wife's names.
Yeah.
It's who we are. And so I took a lot of pride in who I was and to be able to do the job so that there was honor in that name. So the ego part is where all of a sudden you get yourself in trouble. So I have a lot of pride in who you are,
Mhm.
but like not so much ego that you can't learn. And what's fascinating on the jujitsu thing, and I made a joke the other day with the guys I train is that, they're so good. And they were like, like what are your goals in jujitsu? And so Philippe, who's one of my young guys, is really, really talented. And I'm like, I'm gonna submit Philippe. And he's like, it will never happen. And I'm like, that's perfect. The fact that you say that
Yeah.
means that this will never not be my goal.
Yeah.
If you give me like this Mount Rushmore moment,
Yes.
but I'm like, here's the deal. You might just have one day that you're slacking or you don't feel good or you're just not paying attention. And that'll be the day that I'm gonna come and look
Yeah.
for you. So you better not ever slip up.
Um, I wanna go into your NFL experience a little bit.
Okay.
But first,
Uh,
you have a
s
degree in rhetoric.
yeah, well, I was gonna tell you, I also was very fortunate that when I went to college, I went to Berkeley, my offensive line coach is a guy named Tom Cable, pretty famous,
Yes, it is.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, coached a ton of guys and then obviously was a very successful, coach. I mean, coached in Seattle and just a, like, extremely very demanding tax master,
Yeah.
to say the least, but and also very intense dude. So I played for him. So I had an incredible skill set and a very good coach who was like an NFL coach in college. And then we had a strength coach guy named Todd Rice. And Todd Rice is the personal coach for the Busa brothers.
Yeah.
And so he's the guy that developed the Busa brothers, and he's their yeah. I
Talk
mean,
about epitomes of strength conditioning performance right there, man.
well, yeah, I
Holy
mean,
crap.
yeah, so, I mean, that's what he was, at Cal, all over college football and ended up kinda getting out of college football and then, went and worked at the Busa Brothers, so,
Those
I
dudes are
mean
freaks, man.
yeah, he was, I came from this powerlifting background, and he was, snatch, clean, and jerk,
Mhm.
I mean, literally, like, purely Olympic lifting, weightlifting shoes, front squatting, I mean, it was, an incredible program, and so I got to see the powerlifting stuff.
At a time when that wasn't common
No,
too, you know what I mean?
no, I
Yeah.
mean, literally, I wasn't allowed to bench press.
Yeah.
So we had to go down to the rec center, the RFC, which was down where the students are, and go down there and bench heavy because we couldn't bench.
That's funny.
And so it was like overhead pressing, jerking, snatch, clean, and jerk, and front squat.
Yeah.
And I
I mean, I
squatted.
love the bench press. To me, it's a great accessory lift.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Really.
yeah.
I know that'll rub some people the wrong way.
No, I
I
do.
think it's a valuable exercise.
Yes.
But it's an accessory lift to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unless you're in powerlifting, I mean, but yeah, I mean, I wanted to bench 500 pounds.
Yeah.
And, I benched 500 and I was super proud of it. I mean, I squatted 610 when I was 19 and benched 500 and, snatched, 172, clean and jerked 180 and, had a 500-pound front squat. And so, but yeah, I mean, the training that Todd did was incredible.
Wait,
And
180, but that's kilos.
yeah, in kilos. Yeah.
So it's gonna confuse people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, 396. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, he, an amazing strength coach, but also a very prickly taskmaster, had a very like high level of expectation. And if you did not meet that or you caught him on a bad day, I remember one day we were, 6 a.m., I think we were in January, February. It was cold. It was rainy. It was shitty out. And we're out on like the turf getting ready to do all of our, dynamic movement prep and all of our plyometrics and sprint stuff. He fucking drove his car out onto the field, rolled the window down. It was raining and started yelling at us and coaching from his car and then was rolling the window up. And I remember being like, what an asshole. But I mean, yeah, it was, it's a funny memory now, but yeah, so I was very fortunate to train with him. And then, Tom Canavy and Mike Wolf, who were my strength coaches at the Eagles, were extremely, flexible and allowed me to do what I wanted. And then I trained with a guy named Rafael Ruiz. So I have had just probably the greatest collection of mentors and coaches
Yeah.
than anybody could ever hope for. And it wasn't necessarily for searching. It just happened to be, whether it be fate, God, whatever you call, these people were put in my path, and I was intelligent enough to be able to grasp it.
Though a lot of people have had people, those people didn't just weren't just exposed to you. They weren't your personal coaches. It's just a lot of that is what you take from them too.
Yes.
Being willing to learn, open yourself up, take the criticism, um, see criticism as a challenge, not get your feathers ruffled too easily by prickly. Sometimes the best people to learn from, the geniuses, they ruffle feathers, man.
Yeah.
They don't, but always put on their kid gloves.
Yeah.
How do you think your degree in rhetoric maybe helped you later in life and through some of these challenges?
Oh, man. So when I went to college, I wasn't necessarily, this is how I put this. Like, I never really thought about playing in the NFL. So when I all of a sudden got all these scholarship offers, my dad was like, my dad was super smart. Like, he graduated high school at 16, graduated college at 19, graduated law school in his
Holy
20s,
shit.
and then was like a practicing criminal defense attorney for like 55
Your
years.
brothers are in that field as
Yeah,
well, yeah.
yeah. My older brother, same deal. My oldest brother went to law school, but figured out, and he does insurance stuff.
Yeah.
So both fucking way more successful than I've ever been. So my dad just razor sharp, and when I started getting all these scholarship offers, I took a trip to Nebraska, and this would have been like '94 Nebraska.
Yeah.
Like, this was the
I
height.
mean, Cal was pretty good when you went to.
Yeah.
Is that around the Aaron
Yeah.
Rodgers era?
No, 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 this is before. This is
Before,
after
isn't-
they, yeah, this is like Todd Stussy and
Yes.
Eric
Yeah.
Malum and a lot of these guys like, Reagan Upshaw, Dwayne Clemens,
Yeah.
Jared Willard. I played with like a bunch of, like, it was crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
Cal was a power, like a really good
we
school,
didn't win a
though.
lot of games, but everybody went in the first round.
Yeah.
So I didn't go there for that reason. I went there because it was the best degree I could hang on my wall.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad, like, SC, UCLA, Cal, Nebraska, and Colorado, where I took my trips. And my dad's like, Berkeley degree will always carry weight. And like, there was never anything of like, hey, like, this is, a chance to go play in the NFL. Like I didn't know anybody played in the NFL.
Yeah.
It might as well have been like going to Mars.
I'm always shocked when I train kids and they have a chance to go to somewhere like, James Madison or Elon or an Ivy League even,
Mhm.
and they'll go to a Division I like Tulsa. I'm like, "What are you doing, man?"
Yeah.
Like, I know one says Division I in front of it, but you just had a chance to go to James and James Madison's Division I too
Yeah.
now, but, you have a chance to go to these, like, prestigious schools.
Yeah.
Like, it's just crazy. They cherish that Division I label a little too much sometimes.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I mean, I think I was 6'4", like, people laugh, these kids now are like 6'7", 400 pounds in high school. I think it was like 255, 260 pounds, so I wasn't huge. And so I took my trips, and when I went to Cal, they asked me, like, "What are you interested in studying?" And I was like, "I'd really like to be an attorney like my dad." Um, and they ended up hooking me up with a like kind of a advisor kind of deal. Like, hey, we want you to go meet this guy who used to be head of the Bolt Hall. It's called Berkeley Law School now, but he was former dean of Bolt Hall, a guy named Adrian Cragen. And he's, retired, and we'd love for you to go hang out with him if you want. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. So he was kind of advisor. I went and I sat with this old man for a couple hours, and turned out that the older lawyer that apprenticed my dad was a friend of his. My dad's the old guy was a guy named Kent Redwine, and when we were kids, my dad used to take us down. He had a big house down in like Palm Desert. We would go down there, and he had these huge grapefruits, and we'd like swim in his pool when I was like, like 5, 6 years old. So he knew Kent and actually had been to his house, and they were both in like the LA film deal. And so it was kind of an interesting piece there. But he said some things to me that day that have impacted every single thing I've written, everything I've done. And I never forget, his name was Adrian, like obviously Adrian Cragen. But he talked about, only a fool speaks before he learns to read and write. And he said, if you want to be a great attorney and you want to be a great thinker and you want to be successful, learn to read and write to the best of your ability. And he goes, if you do it in that order, he goes, because when you read, you're having a conversation with the smartest people to ever walk this planet.
That's
And then when you start to write, that's your ability to work your own thoughts in. And then once you establish this, then you're okay to present it to the world. Only a fool does it in reverse.
That's amazing advice, man.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. So I got to learn to read and write to the best of my ability if you want to be an attorney. So then he said, hey, there happens to be a really cool major here at Berkeley called rhetoric. And it's like an English philosophy mixed degree, but it has an argumentative approach. So you'll actually learn rhetorical writing is what you need to learn for law school. And then at the end of it, he said, we have a scholarship here called the Adrian Cragen Scholarship for a 4-year letterman. And if you want to come to Bolt, make sure you earn your letter in your freshman year, and then when you apply, like, this would be great if you came here. And so I went home, I told my dad, and I was like, "Dad, I met this guy," and he's like, "I don't know him," but I mean, he knew Kent Redwine, right? So it was, a really special moment, and, so I went to Berkeley,
You know what's
and
funny? I'm going to connect some dots here. I think one of the problems today is people don't know how to argue appropriately. You know what I mean? And
yes,
they violate the rules. They do the logical fallacies. They don't even
yes,
know what those are.
yeah,
And I welcome good arguments. And when you study rhetoric and do what you did, you're learning how to almost argue with yourself.
yeah,
You see a problem in your own head, you can see both sides, and you argue your way through it,
yeah,
and it just helps you with your understanding. And I just think there's a direct correlation between your interest, your exposure to rhetoric, and the way you're able to look at fitness and nutrition and problems now. I just feel like it's really impacted you.
yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I mean, so the coolest part was I show up, I gotta take a Rhetoric 1A and 1B, which was the lower division, and, I mean, like, all of a sudden, they give me $20, and I'm reading, like, all of the classics, and, all of a sudden, I'm reading, everything from, like, the Cynics to the Stoics, and, like, all of this stuff that's now super cool and
I
trendy
know,
to,
right?
like.
It's
Oh,
funny.
it is, it's
Yeah.
hilarious that,
It's
like,
all dumbed down so much for
well,
people. It's
yeah,
good, good. I'm
yeah, I
glad.
mean,
Yeah.
you'll hear people talk about, like, I mean, Jordan Peterson does an incredible job on Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And, I was like Nietzsche's work was so impactful, just like reading, Marcus Aurelius and Meditations and, Seneca. And like, I was exposed to that so early. And the interesting part was everything that we read, then it had to be followed up with some, anywhere from, 4 to 6 to, 7 to 10 to, 12 to 14 page, 15 page paper, basically pulling out all of these individual arguments, making an argument and then coming back and like supporting it in this. I mean, so you're pulling out all these threads and veins of, Dostoevsky and, the Raskolnikov and the Superman and this and like all of this crazy stuff. And like, this was my opportunity to sit and talk to the smartest people on the planet that have ever walked and read these books and then be able to, pull out these different veins. And then it was kind of Socratic method. So the teacher would come in, we would sit
Mm.
discussing, and they would call on you. You'd have to, start engaging. And if you didn't engage, the teacher would be like, you're out.
Mm.
You get 3 of these, you fucking fail the class.
Yeah.
And so you had to be on your toes. You had to have an argument. You had to be able to speak, and you had to be somewhat passionate about what you read.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible opportunity for me. And then there were some fun things that I did in college where my rhetorical superpowers ended up helping me tremendously. Like I took an education class and it was called democratic education. I signed up for it. I was like, that looks interesting. Sign up for this democratic education class. The first day, they ask us as a group to come together to figure how we'll be graded. And so I see my opportunity and I give up and I give this impassioned talk about, I think the problem in education is the bondage that we feel of being graded. I want to release these and throw these bonds off, throw off the chains and just basically allow people to flourish in an environment where they don't feel like they're being graded. So what I recommend is we all get straight A's on the first day. And then we use this as a social experiment.
Appeal to emotion a little bit.
Yeah, and we do this as a social experiment when we remove the bonds of grading and we just give everybody an A, and then we see what we can build in this utopian, class, this
That's so
society.
awesome.
And the teacher's up there going, "No!" And everybody's like, "Yes!" And so that first day, everybody got an A.
That's
And,
awesome.
4 units of upper division A. So we go through the class, and then I felt, like I had to show up every day every time I was there. It was like, 2-day a week. So I had to show up because I was like, "Well, shit, I, like, talked all this shit, I gotta go."
Yeah.
So I was invested in the class and went.
Yeah. Yeah.
A majority of people never showed up again. So then
Yeah.
at the end of the day, everybody gets an A. And then, I went down and, was telling the advisors, I was like, "Man, we're in this great class, democratic education is what happened." The next year, they signed a bunch of people up, completely got rid of that
That's
requirement,
hilarious.
and so I broke it. So I was, there were many
Oh, that's a
opportunities,
great story.
but, like, Berkeley was such a great center of learning.
Yeah.
Like, I told somebody the other day, Bob Woodward's daughter, I went to school with her, she was there, and he came and spoke. I mean,
Wow.
like, the amount of people that just showed up and you get to go here and were just around, it was an amazing place.
University is such a, if you take advantage of it, an amazing experience because it can get you out of your bubble and expose you to people from all kinds of walks of life if you're willing to like
Mhm.
be open to it.
Yeah.
And then your journey through the NFL.
Yeah, so, I like I said, I graduated in 4 years, and then I did my master's work in education in my 5th year, and where I played my 5th year, and then, ended up, playing pretty well and ended up, going to the combine and then getting drafted second pick in the fourth round, which was a little lower than, what they were telling me second or third, but ended up going to the fourth.
What's your opinion on the combine process and how accurate it is
Uh,
in evaluating talent? And if you could change something, what would you change?
well, um, I think it's interesting. Like a couple years ago, my buddy Dave Spitz hit me up and said, "Hey, I got all these offensive linemen, that we're getting through the combine. He's doing a bunch of combat prep. Would you come out and talk to him?" I said, "Great, I'll come out and work with them." So I went out and I sat all these guys down. I'm like, "The combine is by far the greatest fashion show you'll ever go to."
Mhm.
And the interviews and all the stuff you're going to go through this experience, that I can prep you for what they want to hear, and I can set this thing up in such a way that I can show you how to be the prettiest girl in the room. And we went in there and I prepped these guys and told the coaches exactly what I want to hear because I'd been on the other side,
Mhm.
and then helped them, especially with their technique stuff. Like, this is how I want you to do it. Here's the things that you say, and here's what the coaches are going to be looking for. And it ended up going really well. I mean, one of the kids was undrafted, didn't even go to the combine, and he's a starting center for Baltimore.
No way,
Yeah.
really?
So I mean, those
That's
guys
super
all
cool.
did really well. And he asked me, like, after 3 days of training them, do you think that these kids can play? And I was like, I will tell you that some of the, like, I was pretty honest. I was like, these 5 kids can. These other 2 guys are going to be tweeners, and ended up hitting it 100%. And it's
Mhm.
just for the fact that, when you become an established player in the NFL, they bring in young guys, and it's really easy to see, pretty quick, like, who has it and who doesn't.
What are some of the factors that you're referring to that differentiate between who has it and who doesn't?
I
Tangible and in.
I think like a little bit of a prison, like you fight on the first day.
Yeah.
If you got a chip on your shoulder and you got to fight, and like not just coming out and pushing people and getting into brawls,
Yep.
but like being in a drill or something and finishing the drill, or when somebody does something cheap, pushing them back, or if there is a fight, you're one of the first guys in.
Yeah.
The other one is, can you take to coaching? So if, like, for example, I worked with uh, starting right guard for the Colts this year, a guy named Will Fries. So Fries hit me up, came out for a bunch of weeks, and we just literally worked his technique. And one of the things that I told him I was impressed by is that, okay, I know what you're doing. Show me. I want you to do this. And he's able to make the correction.
Mhm.
And then once he makes the correction, all of a sudden he doesn't make the correction, or he doesn't make the mistake over and over again.
Yeah. You don't have
So
to be retaught.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, hey, I want you to do this. Can you not only do what I'm asking, but can you continue to do it well? And then, against air is one thing, but now we put a pad and then you kind of ramp up intensity.
Mhm.
And what happens is, when the intensity goes up, very few people are like present, and they just go back to whatever bullshit they were doing before.
Got you.
And
That's
that
great
was,
insight, being able to be present in the technique when the intensity increases.
yeah.
That's
So
great.
there's, when intensity goes up, there's two types of people. Like, the other people get super nervous.
Mhm.
And for me, when intensity goes up and it gets really stressful, I all of a sudden get this like
Mhm.
weird moment of clarity, and I take a deep breath and I get everything just kind of locks in. And that's what you look for in those guys. Like, can
Yes.
they be in a
There's a
extremely,
lot of parallels, of that between that and, like, special operations,
yeah,
I've noticed. The
yeah,
best guys get the calmest when
mhm,
everything else gets the most chaotic.
yeah.
Yeah.
And also when you talk about stress, I mean, and the NFL is very different today than it was when I played. Not better or worse, just very
How
different.
so?
The amount of volume that we did in terms of practice and hitting. So
Mhm.
I kind of calculated it out, from actually when I talked to Will Fries, and we were sitting with Fries, as the guys used to call him Papas Fritas because we train with the Brazilians.
That's
So they're like,
awesome.
they call him Papas. And
That's awesome.
so we're sitting with Fries, and we were kind of going through their practice schedule, how much hitting. And I realized, in a 10-year career for him, he's going to have less contact than what I had in my rookie training camp.
That's crazy.
So we were in training camp 42 days my rookie year, Andy Reid's first year, because we had a bye. We played the early game and had a bye. And we were pads in the morning, pads at night, pads in the morning, special teams. So we had 4 practices in 3 days. Each of those practices were 2.5, 3 hours, 9-on-7, 1-on-1. I mean, it was all live bullets.
I think all that volume's maybe important when for younger kids, but at that age with you just can't you
Well,
you're so big and so
yeah.
fast and so powerful that
Well, what was interesting is, when you play offensive line, the way you learn your task is with the live bullets.
yeah.
So the guys like learn their skill. That's why, like, early in the season, guys are super high, a lot of injuries, and then towards the end of the season, guys are getting better. But the amount of volume we did, we were just so much better.
Yeah.
But also, it was like the conditions were just fucking hot, and it was awful, and it was just this like baton death march. And you really start to see guys, like, they come in with the piss and the vinegar and the fire, and they're ready to go. And it's like, can you do it for day one? But can you do it for
Mhm.
10, 12, 20, 30 days of this nonsense? Can you just have this, fucking strategic mind to be able to just like turn your brain off, shut up, strap it up when it's hot, 100 degrees and humid and ugly, and continue to go out there and just
That's
beat wholesale
another
ass.
correlation between that and special operations and military in general, I think. Can you focus on the task
Yep.
even when you're uncomfortable? And I would always be a little hesitant when I'd see guys come in very hot and like on it. And I'm like, that's going to be hard to maintain.
Mhm.
And I'm just really curious if that you're going to still feel that way. The guys that were like there, but
Yeah.
like you could tell they were trying to like govern themselves a little
Yeah.
bit. And
Yeah. It's
it's
like the, common city wins the race.
so you're good friends with Andy Stumpf.
Mhm.
If you don't know him, people need to know him.
Yeah.
Uh, you have a lot of firsthand experience working with primarily DEVGRU, but all special operations,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Both training them, training with them, and programming training for them.
Yeah.
Um, so, what are some commonalities between high level athletes and special operators, in your opinion?
Uh, so the interesting thing about Naval Special Warfare and those guys is not only extremely smart, they make very good decisions. They have in confidence when they make the decision, and they are able to suffer more than any other human being I've ever met.
Yeah,
So, I wish there was a diagnostic, a training. I mean, maybe not the greatest athletes, not the strongest, not the biggest, but their ability to execute upon a task and to understand it and be able to like problem solve in the face of all these is really fascinating.
yeah, I agree.
Those guys are super smart. Like I just got done doing 5 days with the DevGru guys out at Damnick, and we did kind of a combination. We went in and basically did all of our S&C stuff, and then in the afternoon we did jujitsu. So I brought Victor Hugo, Philippe Costa, who are two of the top guys in the world, and then also Arash Safani, who is one of the brown belts. So I brought those three guys, and we just basically rolled with those guys for 5 days. And the funny part was, while their jujitsu was not as polished as everybody's. I mean, because these guys are absolute fucking killers. But like, one, these guys don't like to lose.
Mhm.
They're extremely athletic. They're in great shape. And like, once you teach them something, it's on a lock. Like, they don't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah,
So it was really fun to roll with those guys because they were all really good. They were super athletic, and they have this like incredible desire to be able to execute. And at the end of the day, they're kind of bros.
yeah,
So like, you can like do jits and bang weights. You can talk some shit. Then we can
yep.
sit around the table, and I remember on the last day, we were supposed to do a bunch of classroom stuff and go this. And I was like, hey, you guys want to do this, the Q&A? And they're like, well, let's just do it here at lunch. And it ended up breaking it down into what my favorite conspiracy theories are.
That's awesome.
And I was like, so I basically sat around at Damnick with the guys at DevGru and talked about conspiracy theories. And we argued about which ones are good and which ones are bad. And it was just really fun because while I'm not a huge tinfoil hat guy, I do so at Sorin X, you kind of heard the talk. I talked about authenticity,
Mhm.
and the reason that a lot of things feel inauthentic is very few people have their own ideas and their own thoughts.
I
So
totally
what they
agree.
do is they hear something else and then they parrot it,
Yeah.
and then you hear it and you're like, oh, that's not really what they said. But I think it's both valuable in the beginning when you're young. You can listen to somebody's ideas, like that's like reading, for example.
Mhm.
Like let's say you listen to Jordan Peterson, and you listen to 12 Rules of Life, and you're like, I'm going to adopt this. I'm going to wear this coat, and maybe it helps me become a better version of myself. But if at some point when you grow up, you don't start to have your own ideas,
Mhm.
then it starts to feel disingenuous.
Mhm.
And
I feel like that's why so many people are susceptible to indoctrination
yeah,
too, you know what I mean?
yeah, because they don't really like if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything.
Yes.
But that interesting kind of moment of like trying things on, like I think it's really valuable for young individuals, especially like young impressionable men or whatever. I mean, to be able and women too, but to kind of try on some of these ideas.
Mhm.
And so, similar to the conspiracy theories, I think it's fun to try them on and entertain them and be like, all right, like we've never had a building get hit by, like a building get hit by planes and fall right on itself.
Mhm.
So would it only make sense they had to have demolition charges in it? And so being able to do that exercise, now whether or not it is or not, I'm not going to die on any stake, but I think it's
Yeah.
interesting to have these conversations.
I've noticed too, you can really talk to those guys about any topic because they're curious,
Yeah,
they're interested. Um, they also have a lot of social intelligence, so they can read the room well
yeah,
and blend in the room. But they're also very funny guys.
yeah,
Like you have to be intelligent, have a sense of humor.
yeah,
Yeah, it really, and also I feel like when you ask those guys why they serve and why they're in there, they always have really good thought out answers. They know themselves, they understand the world. They're not dogmatic. They're
yeah,
not indoctrinated,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah,
They see the good and bad and the flaws in both sides, and yeah, I think all of that kind of boils down to same one type of individual.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, there's a definite. I had a very interesting introduction to naval special warfare and special operations. Through guys like Andy Stumpf, Dave Castro. So I ended up going to a CrossFit seminar and ended up meeting Dave Castro, and we ended up kind of talking a little bit about shooting. And he's a real great comp shooter and like really into guns. And I like to shoot guns. I wasn't necessarily a very good shot, but like where I lived in Kansas City was actually pretty close to a shooting range. So we used to go over on Monday nights, and they had kind of a downstairs where we could go shoot with cops. And at the time, I didn't realize that law enforcement wasn't very good shooters compared to these guys. So we go shoot, and like I was like, all right. So then I show up, and we were kind of talking about shooting. I was like, I shoot. And he's like, you should come out with us. So he was coaching, or sorry, he was in Buds. Their kind of the second phase, which is out at La Posta, which is their mountain warfare out at
Is that what
east of San
Andy
Diego.
taught for a while as well? Second phase.
He no, actually, Andy was second phase. I can't remember. So basically, Dave was in charge of their mountain warfare deal,
Okay.
and so those guys, so they have this mountain
Yeah.
warfare deal out of La
Yeah.
Posta, which is in the hills in San Diego.
Okay.
So I would drive down there, and like the students were all out there, and we'd go shoot with them. And I didn't know shit, right? Like these guys are all
These guys are good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they're all good shooters. And so I went out there, and I was very fortunate that they would have like there's a guy named Alex Sonyaberger since passed away, but Alex would show up, and he was an EOD guy, and had been at DEVGRU, and like all these dudes would show up, and like they coached me on shooting, and like I was like obviously I suck at this, like show me how to be better. And so
I also noticed those dudes tend to be very good teachers as well.
oh,
You
dude.
know what I mean?
Well, so the way that, naval special warfare kind of works is those guys become, tip of the spear, kind of like door kickers. And then when they, come back, part of their deal of giving back is they go back and they're buds instructors to train the next group.
Mhm.
Because the idea is that, they're there kind of doing the quality control, making sure nobody gets through that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Because it might be one of their buddies that they
Yeah.
go to a team. So they have this like high sense of honor and urgency, and like, hey, this is a fucking high watermark, dude. You might go work with one of my bros. And it was just a blast. And then, Andy had got shot in Fallujah, had a bunch of injuries, came back, dropped foot and was kind of messed up. And so he ended up rolling back and was a buds instructor. So I meet Andy, and he said to me, he's like, hey, I want to go back on active duty. Can you help me? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so he was my training partner. And so I would drive down to San Diego, and then he would drive up, and he's like, "What are we gonna do?" I'm like, "Well, let's just train like pro football players."
Yeah.
So he was literally did his training, and then he ended up going back on active service with Team 3, and went and had, if you listen to his podcast, some pretty hilarious stuff about shooting, what was it, missiles, like they were, God, what is it, javelin missiles, on human targets, and just has like a bunch of crazy stories. And I always thought he was kind of fucking with me a little bit. And then pretty recently, I was I do some consulting for a pretty high net worth individual who likes to purchase like fitness companies type stuff. So I kind of go out and act as a consultant for him and help him kind of do some AR active action reviews, and help him assess some stuff, especially if he's going to buy it. I'm kind of one of like the people that just goes in as a consultant and talks about the technology and interviews people. And one of the guys that was recently there, I'm sitting next to him. We kind of rapping back and forth, and he's a SEAL right about to get out, and we start talking. I figure out that he was the dude that was having to carry Andy's javelins, and I was like, "Did he really?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." So it was funny that we had I had somebody corroborate the story, because they're like, "This never happened." But Andy is a extremely funny dude.
Yeah.
Got a great sense of humor, and I wish I got to see him more. And he got his black belt in jits, and he's real good. And he's yeah, he's got an interesting perception of life, and so I do enjoy my time when I get to spend with him.
Yeah, I do notice the correlation between, I equate training for the combine with how it's got to differ from the training you're going to need once you get in the NFL, and then
Yeah,
train up for the selection processes is much different
yeah.
than the training required once you're on the team as far as
Yeah.
physical fitness goes.
Well, that so for me, and like where I kind of sit, I've always told them, when I went out with Spitz and those guys, I said, hey, Dave's great at getting you guys ready for the combine. If you guys leave there and you need to get ready for the season, and you feel like you want to be a better football player, like I'm like, come look me up.
I'd always tell my guys I'm going to train you for the combine, but this is but once you get done, come back. I have to train you for the league
Yeah.
because it's going to be way different. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny.
It's two very different jobs.
Yeah. Um, so I've been itching to get to this, man.
Okay.
I couldn't help myself. And as part of the process of studying up for this interview, I heard an amazing quote from you.
Okay.
And I couldn't help but share it on Instagram. I don't want
You
to
got
mess
a lot
up.
of followers. You got like 400,000 followers or something, 425.
I got 700 something, man. Short change.
Well, I looked at the number and I was like, it was a lot. And I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of followers. So when you put that out, I was like, yeah. So
it was one of the best quotes I've ever heard. And I was like, I gotta put this out.
Thank you.
I don't want to mess up the quote. Can you please say what it is? It's so good.
The best trick the devil, or sorry, the way it goes is the best trick the devil ever played was convincing the world he didn't exist. So the best trick that Greg Glassman ever pulled was convincing people that work capacity and athleticism were the same thing.
It convinced people that work capacity and athleticism were the same thing.
Yeah.
I thought it was so amazing and accurate what CrossFit had gotten turned into and how the focus had been skewed a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe even from its original intent.
Yeah.
And I just want to give you an opportunity to, because it ruffled some feathers.
Oh, dude.
CrossFitters are very passionate about their cult.
All of a sudden, we were getting attacked by the Martians. Savon ended up having a podcast earlier today with Glassman live, and they were just basically shelling me in the entire thing.
Oh, no.
Because I was getting texts from people that like, Glassman's running you down and talking shit. And I think that's hilarious.
So you do have a slightly, like many people, contentious past with Greg Glassman.
Yes.
But when I hear you talk about him, you also give him credit for the genius and the things he did. And I love the way you approach people.
Yeah, I will so I'm not a child. So I have the ability to segment from what people did and what they didn't do. And so I realize a lot of individuals, like they're so all or nothing. It's so fucking just ugh.
If they don't like somebody, all of a sudden everything that comes out of their mouth must be inaccurate.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'll tell you, like a great example is Trump.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff that comes out of Trump's mouth, I could do without. I think there's a lot of good that he did, and the problem is that people focus on the negative, and it just takes away from all the positives. So, for all of Greg's neurosis, narcissistic personality disorder, and all of the craziness that I was exposed to, which is CrossFit and Greg Glassman, you can't deny his impact on the world. He has done more to get barbells in people's hands than any other human being on the planet.
Agreed.
I mean, garage gym. I mean, Rogue wouldn't exist. I mean, what we see in terms of like kettlebells and training and just like all of this stuff. I mean, even, something like Sornex, where they're able to like build these things and build these, Taj Mahal weight rooms.
Yeah, it's important that we thank him for what he did for fitness.
Yeah, I mean,
not just
I mean, like, but so to shit on him, and did he deserve to lose his company because he made an fated tweet at the wrong time? A bunch of people were sitting home on lockdown, and the whole world's ready to fall apart, and he, of course, pipes his head up and makes an inappropriate comment at a time when he shouldn't. Did he deserve to lose his company? No. And he ended up having to, sell that thing and, basically see it run into into almost irrelevance, is a sad deal because his impact, all of the positives that he had were so overshadowed by all of these other negatives that I think it's
people don't remember where we were at as a country in fitness when CrossFit took off and like how skewed it was to bodybuilding. And
I remember this. Obviously when I was training in the NFL in the off season, we were training at facilities for NFL players and professional athletes. And I was trained at Athletes Performance in Carson. After I went to Kansas City, I moved back to California. So I would drive up every day from Orange County to Carson. We'd train at Athletes Performance. And I had like Abby Wambach, and we had a bunch of like other pros that would come train with us. And, it was, heavy weights, movement. I mean, a lot of like what you see similar and like what I'd done with Raphael. I'd go out and see Raf, which was, very, post-activation potentiation, a lot of like French contrast and like a lot of these training things that fit within like the Verkhoshansky, that kind of like Zadaskorsky, like, like classic type stuff. And that was what our training looked like. I mean, lift something heavy, do something dynamic. And, so I had built an entire platform on that. And then I went out and trained with Verstegen and those guys. And they had some really interesting stuff that I liked and a lot of shit I didn't. And so I felt that like my input was helpful, and we brought in professional athletes, and it was a great training environment. At some point, we had a ton of pros coming and
Oh
training.
yeah, yeah,
But like that was these little epicenters.
yeah.
And then, you go to the normal gym, like we'd go to like the whatever the Globo, in the neighborhood, or
It was like Nebraska 1994, 20 years later. It just
dude,
doesn't change,
no, and
which is great at the time. But
yeah, I mean, well, we did the metabolic conditioning cycles.
sure.
We did the Nebraska cycles in college.
Yeah.
So I know who Boyd Epley. I mean, Boyd Epley, I had to sit in his office as an 18-year-old kid there on a recruiting trip.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, I ended up
Yeah.
having Boyd on the podcast, and I was like, I know you don't remember this, but I was an 18-year-old kid
That's
sitting in
awesome.
your office. He had like screens everywhere. And, but, um, so like the gym was just like, so I went to the gym and I just saw, I didn't think normal people trained. Like I'd go to the gym and I'd see people just doing bullshit.
Yeah.
And so I like didn't equate it. And I kind of thought like normal people just did like normal shit. They went and like did some machines
Mhm.
and went and like ran a marathon.
Mhm.
So like I lived in this weird ivory tower where like all my friends are professional athletes. The people I train are pro athletes. We train at this like facility for pro athletes. And then like the entire world, which, this is kind of like pre-social media,
Mhm.
like I didn't know that existed. I thought the
Mhm.
best in the world was here. And if you weren't, you were, I don't know, fucking
true.
doing something else.
It's
So
true.
then when like all of a sudden, I go watch the movie 300, like literally I go see this thing,
It was a big break for them,
dude.
man. Yeah.
That was like, if you listen to any of like the Graham, Hancock, Joe Rogan, kind of like, their whole deal about the Angus dryer and like the fact we were in an ice age and then we got peppered with all these, meteors, and that's what basically melted us out and got us into these times. But if like that was that Unger Dryas effect
Yeah.
where now all of a sudden I'm watching that movie 300 come out. I literally got done, walked out, and a new one, and they were showing in like 4 theaters.
Yeah.
I walked out, walked into the one right across where it was starting, sat down and watched it back to back.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking like, "Holy shit.
Yeah.
Like this is gonna change like how everybody's gonna perceive this." And then all of a sudden after that movie, I remember being at like we
Yeah.
we went to the gym and people started asking me about training.
Yeah.
And it was crazy 'cause, I drive up to Athletes Performance, and then there were a couple bodybuilders that trained at this, sports club, right, where I go with my brother, and I used to train with those guys 1 or 2 days a week because they were the only dudes that were strong enough,
Yeah.
right? Like, they were all big, strong dudes, and so I'd go down, and when we would bench heavy or squat heavy or do something heavy, I just find these dudes,
Yeah.
and they were always good for a spot. I mean, they were, 150-pound dumbbells, bench 500, you got 600 pounds on a squat, like, these dudes are great to spot you. And, all of a sudden, like, normal people that shouldn't have been asking us what we were doing were all of a sudden doing this.
Mhm.
And I had a buddy who was big and, started doing a bunch of CrossFit stuff.
Yeah.
And so one day he asked me about Olympic lifting. He's like, "Hey, do you know how to Olympic lift?" I'm like, "Yeah, snatch, clean, jerk. You wanna learn how to do it?"
Like we forget how few people. That's another thing, and I don't agree with how they do it necessarily, or how fast they progress it, or how
Mhm.
they always implement it. But it brought Olympic lifting to the mainstream.
Yeah.
And like it
Dude.
wasn't well known before that.
No, so when I was in college, I bought, we had Olympic lifting shoes. I had to give him a check, and they came like 6 weeks later
That's
because they
awesome.
came from, like, Sweden.
It's awesome.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I remember buying an Eleiko bar for my house. So I had a little gym in my house. I had like a Woodway treadmill. I had like Eleiko weights, Eleiko bar.
Yeah.
Like it was thousands of dollars, and it took months to show up.
That's funny.
Like I had to call, I think Bud Charnick or whoever the guy is just passed away that I had to call. But like I had to like, like getting this stuff was like trying to I don't know, like find like a Bitcoin or
Yeah.
something. Like it was tough.
We take for granted a lot of the things that are popular today, and not realizing that it exploded in popularity in
Because of CrossFit. Yeah. And this was Greg Glassman's influence.
Bodybuilders have a very specific look, and
Mhm.
that didn't exist before the 1950s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you look at back to the more of the classic strongmen and like the Greek statues, which what the 300 look was, it's it's a lot of the CrossFit type stuff, like de-emphasis of the chest and the biceps,
Yeah.
right? And more vertical pulling and power activities, and core is involved in almost everything. And the classic physiques didn't have big chests; it just didn't exist before the 60s.
Yeah.
And it really opened people's eyes to the aesthetic appeal that training like an athlete can
Yeah.
bring.
Well, I used to hear people all the time, "Oh, I wanna look like a running back. I wanna look like this." I'm like, "Well, then you have to do training
You
that."
have to train like running.
Yeah, like, they don't look that way because they want to look like
Everyone wants to look like a sprinter, and they train like a marathon runner.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah, I was like, yeah.
I'll show pictures to women that come in that say, I ask them what they're doing, and I'll show them a picture of like a 400-meter sprinter, a woman,
Yeah.
and a 10 miler. I'm like, which one do you want to look like? And they always point to the 400-meter sprinter. I'm like, well, she doesn't run distance.
So
She lifts heavy weights.
my girlfriend, I'm married, but I dated a girl who was an all-American 800-meter runner from Cal. She was like 5'8", 5'9", could wear like men's jeans and a t-shirt, and if she was standing on the corner, she would literally cause accidents. She was so physical and moved so well. She's just incredible athlete and just physically so gifted.
800-meter runners, some of the most mentally
Yeah.
tough people on the
And
planet
and
too.
and didn't really lift weights. And I
Yeah.
remember people used to stop her and ask her all the time, and she's like, "I just run and I got good genetics." And like it was pretty interesting, man. Like but yeah, I just remember like standing there and cars would just wreck, and I'd be like, "Dude,
I'm a big fan of history, and the Spartan women were known
Yeah.
for how pretty they were and how athletic they
Yeah.
were. And I was reading some old text about what they would do, and the way they described it, they were doing plyometrics. They would do jump tucks,
Yeah.
broad jumps, vertical jumping, split jumping.
Yeah.
Like it was a lot of jumping and dynamic effort stuff.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, the Spartan stuff is wild, especially when they got into, like, their marriage rituals and the agoge.
Yeah.
Like, the women would, like, they would shave their heads and put them in a burlap sack, and then they put them in a room, and then they would, like, a mock rape. I mean, it was super weird.
It's a twisted society. It's funny
Yes.
how we emulate. Like it's not something I'd want America. First of all, it's
Well,
based on slavery.
yeah, and on top of it, they've romanticized it,
Yeah.
where,
It's like pedophilia and all kinds of other
Oh,
weird
yeah.
stuff that
Well, I
went on.
mean, they felt that, that the bonding of men, that the warriors would fight better if they were,
Sure.
bonded. So then they lived in the after the agoge, they would live together, and then they would still live together after they were married,
Mhm.
and it was for procreate. I mean, yeah, it's,
It was funny because the thing that finally ended the Spartan reign was the Battle of Leuctra, I want to say, when the Sacred Band of Brothers finally defeated them, which were 150 pairs of gay lovers, basically.
Yeah.
So it's the same concept that
Yeah.
other Greeks had started to adopt. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and then when you hear the movie 300, when he's like, the Athenians and these boy lovers, and I'm like,
yeah,
you
that's
know,
y'all too.
so in my rhetoric stuff, we read, the Phaedrus, and like I read all these classics. So I also know how they viewed the Spartans. And I always remember my favorite quote about the Spartans was they asked them, like, how come there are no walls in Sparta? And they were like, we are the walls,
That's right.
right? There are no,
I mean, I love laconic. I mean, lacademia. I mean, it all
Yeah.
comes from like very simple, plain, direct speech.
Yeah.
Not using too many flowery words. And my favorite one is when this is post their dominance too. I think it's when either Philip or Alexander the Great, I think it's Alexander the Great or his dad, were threatening to invade Sparta, and they kept saying if this, and
they
then
sent them back
it was
we come
perfect.
there.
Yeah. You just go if.
And what's wild is all of this stuff is, encased within antiquity and how they were viewed, to the point where even after like the other kind of like Roman city states, like the nobility would hire Spartan women to come be their nursemaids.
Yeah.
So the Spartan women were extremely, like sought after to raise your children
Yeah.
because of how they were and how they were raised, and like there's a famous line in the 300 where she said, only, what is it? Like only, Spartan men, only a Spartan woman can raise a Spartan man,
Yeah.
and like only those are real men. I mean, like they did a great job in that movie, with
Capturing the culture.
and
Yeah.
they added a bunch of romance in that whole thing. But Leonidas was in his 50s.
Yeah.
So the fact that he rolled out there and was super fit, I mean, the stories about these guys are legit. So, I mean, anything like that, to be able to survive through antiquity with these stories,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I've been doing, I write, so I'll put them out as blog posts on my blog, Talk to Me, Johnny. And I've been doing it for years, which is, I read and I write, and then I come up with ideas, and this is how I present. But I started this blog called Talk to Me, Johnny, which is based off of my favorite movie, which is First Blood.
Yeah.
Rambo First Blood, where he's like Coven leaving the raid and
Oh,
talking
he's
to
in the
Johnny.
cave. Yeah.
So it's called,
Such a great movie too, an underrated,
dude,
great,
that's
well-written movie.
the one of the best. I mean, the
Yeah.
book is great, but yeah, that movie.
Same with that and Rocky 1. Rocky
Yes.
1 and 2 were just phenomenally well-written movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started this blog called Talk to Me, Johnny, and I write on there, and we started doing podcasts, so I didn't write as much, but I've gotten back to it. And there's just like one of the interesting things that I've been working on is a piece on like the fact that Seneca lived about the same time as Jesus. And if you look at their messaging, it's very similar, almost identical.
Mhm.
It just that Seneca never claimed to be the son of God.
Mhm.
And then you see how Jesus goes on, and then obviously that Christianity becomes this cult religion that almost destroys the Roman Empire. And then as it kind of the emperor becomes a Roman or becomes a Christian on his deathbed, and then Christianity takes hold and takes over, and then the fall of the Roman Empire, and it really didn't fall; it just basically became the Catholic Church. And,
Yeah, exactly. I was never really into the Dark Ages until recently. I've been listening to The Rest is History, and they go over the Frankish Empire,
Yeah.
and how interesting that gap was that bridged the time between the Dark Ages and the High Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And how the Franks considered themselves Roman still, and would go
Yes.
back and read Roman manuals, and
Yeah.
they didn't at the time consider the Roman Empire as had fallen. They were just a continuation of it.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting how they viewed themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the like this culture, and then you think like the Dark Ages come out, and then you get into like the Age of Enlightenment, and like the the classics, and you get into the Renaissance. I mean, it's really it's fascinating. But for me, I had a professor, a guy named Stephen G. Miller, and he is one of the foremost experts in ancient athletics. So I took his class. He went and excavated one of the original sites of the Olympic Games at Nemea. There were 4, and he went and actually, as like a young graduate assistant, goes out and he's like, "Well, this is kind of where we think it is." Put a stake, and they started digging.
No way.
And he excavated and found the original site at Nemea. And so I was very fortunate to take his class at Berkeley. I took a bunch of his classes, and we've still stayed friends. He wrote a cool book on the Dark Ages, and he's convinced that the reason it's called the Dark Ages is because it was dark. Like they didn't have sun for like
Sure.
200 or 300 years.
Yeah, I'm ready. You got to read a book called A World Lit Only by Fire. It's really good.
Okay.
How twisted the Catholic Church was in its origins.
Well, I'm Catholic.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting, like being Catholic is one of the more interesting things, because you do it as a kid, and you kind of have this like exposure to the church. And like when I go to Catholic church, it's still, there's like a comfort for the fact that I was growing up in it, and it's 4 stands, 3 sits, 2 kneels, and you go through the whole deal.
Mhm.
And like, you know everything. But then when you get into the history of the Catholic Church, and like, I mean,
They don't try to hide it either. From people I've talked to that go to the Vatican, they'll tell the
Yeah.
history, and then they'll tell how the popes would use it as a brothel, and
Yeah.
they'd put their young sons, make them bishops of,
Yeah.
Marseille and all places.
dude, no, I mean the corruption, and like it just extremely, but I mean, this is, power corrupts absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
these individuals were some of the most depraved on the planet, and the wild part is they were doing it in the name of God.
Yeah.
But then there's a great book that's called The Immortality Key, which the guy went back and basically did research and figured out that, like, got into the Vatican archives. They did a bunch of analysis of like the early Christians and the mystics, and found that there was psychedelic properties within not only the wine but the hosts, and kind of like why the Christian mysticism kind of allowed people through these psychedelic. And I'm not a huge psychedelics guy, but I thought the book was incredible. But he talked about Christian mysticism and their ability to commune with God through these different sacraments. And then at some point, the Catholic Church was like, no, we are the vehicle
Yep.
for salvation.
Yes.
And so then they spent eons stomping this out. Women were considered like the makers of this. So then they had like this, assault on all women. I mean, this. So
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing to see. I mean, and what is there? 67 miles of catacombs underneath with all the
Yeah.
world's history
Yeah.
that I'd love to be able to go through.
So I knew this was a risk factor in this podcast, so going down these tangents. Didn't expect to be talking about this right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So pull it back.
Yeah. A cool thing about ancient history, though, like the halteres and things, and how we ended up getting the dumbbell, but then just randomly, because dumbbells were something that they would tie to the bells that wouldn't ring, so they could practice ringing it and train, because it was exhausting and it took skill because they're heavy.
Yeah.
And they would have to ring them for a while. So the kids had to train, the people had to train for that. So they would, as a dumb means quiet, a
Mhm.
quiet bell, so they could practice without waking up the town, right?
Oh.
And when they first started lifting weights, they thought it resembled one of those. And so they started to make them, because that was the heaviest thing they had also.
Sure.
So they just started lifting the heavy compact thing. And we just the dumbbell just kind of fell on us. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Whereas you look back at the halter, which is like this, you got to look it up. It's this really cool implement the Greeks would use as their form of the dumbbell, but it was designed to resemble a shield or something they would use in battle, that more curvilinear in nature.
Yeah.
It's just funny, the happenstance of the things that have fallen into our laps.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to get back on track.
Okay.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Man.
Sorry. So we were getting the
yeah.
CrossFit thing. So, I am, go and I compete in the CrossFit Games. They end up filming a movie about it. You can watch it on Netflix. It's called Every Second Counts. 7 days later, I go play for the Patriots, and then I got hurt at the end of training camp. Came home, chipped off a piece of bone in my knee, got stuck in the joint, and I had surgery and cleaned it out. While I was doing rehab, Greg Glassman reached out to me, and there was a mutual friend we have that was graduating from the War College in DC, and he invited me if I would come. And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'm not doing anything." So I flew out, and I was, hanging out with Greg, and we went to dinner, and he kind of pitched me on this idea of doing kind of a sport-specific version of CrossFit. They had CrossFit Kids. They had done something with the endurance side,
Mhm.
and then he's like, there needs to be something on the other side of the spectrum. And so he asked me about, and it was kind of an interesting pitch in that he said, would you come help us help, or would you come help us develop our technology on how to train athletes? Kind of paraphrasing to some extent. And I thought that was pretty interesting because when I was, obviously got hurt, and here's my 10th year, and all of a sudden, what was wild was that I had got, a couple years before I got hurt on a Sunday, flew to Colorado, got scoped on a Monday, and played on the next Sunday. And now all of a sudden, I'm getting my knee scoped, and it's like 3, 4 months later, and I can't get rid of the swelling. My knee's still lit up, like I'm having problems. And all of a sudden, like I'm thinking, like, shit, man, like, do I need to start looking to do something else?
Yeah.
This is the end of it. This is my 10th year.
Yeah.
So I went back to the original plan. I'm gonna go to law school. So started filling out law school applications. It had been, 10 years since I'd taken my LSATs, and they're only good for 5, so I was gonna have to restudy. So I start putting this game plan together to go to law school, and then he hits me with this thing, and I remember thinking like, like, how do I put this, man? I sound like a dick. But, while I didn't buy in wholeheartedly on what they taught and their methodology and a lot of, like, the dogma. What I liked was the community.
Yeah.
I was, like, enamored with the fact that, like, normal people, non-professional
And
athletes
it was
were
performance based.
well, they were willing
Yeah.
to show up and fucking suffer, rip
Yeah.
their hands open and
Yes.
grind. And
Suffering.
and this was
Yes.
wild to me because I didn't think normal people did it. I thought
And
normal
root for
people
each other. And
yeah.
yeah.
There was community and people like, it was the community of individuals that had assembled around the banner of CrossFit that was most intriguing to me.
Yeah.
I was like, "Man, I can work with these people." I don't like the people at the top, this is gonna be a little more
So two
difficult.
questions. So first of all, a confession and apology. I've always talked shit about CrossFit football because I didn't know shit about CrossFit
Yeah.
football, and I just hated the name. I was like,
I hated the name
that
too.
makes no sense to me.
Dude, it didn't make any sense, and when they
Yeah.
pitched me on the name, I said, "This is a terrible fucking name.
Yeah.
Let's not call it this." And then Greg's like, "No, no, no. You play football, people get it." And I'm like, "No, this is a terrible name."
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
you
I
should have
didn't know
talked shit on it.
it. But and then secondly, so first of all, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Thank you.
Lesson learned there. Don't talk shit unless you actually know what it's about.
Yeah.
Secondly, what was your impression of Greg Glassman at that relatively early stage as a human being and as a businessman?
So there's a 2 Greg Glassmans. The Greg that you see on stage in front of hundreds of people is charismatic, witty, funny, intelligent, and probably one of the best presenters I've ever seen. Like, his ability to work an audience when he's in front is like no other person I've ever seen other than maybe Hitler. Like, I mean, when you
Oh, dude, you just compared Glassman to Hitler.
No.
The
No, I'm
CrossFitter people are gonna come.
yeah, they're gonna be really upset about this. But like, so when I was in college, we had this like, I had a rhetoric laboratory course,
Yeah.
and we came in and like had to watch, Hitler and Mussolini, and
Yeah.
we watched all these
They were
speakers.
great orators.
Oh my God.
God.
So like the fever at which Hitler spoke,
Mhm.
I mean, it like he did it in German, and you're like seeing this, and then then the teacher got up and read the translation, and you're like, "Oh, okay, it's a little dicey." But I mean, his ability, I mean, they showed these
He would start
crowds
out awkward, a little bit
yeah,
uncomfortable,
and then
like
he
on
would like
purpose.
fucking grow into this fire. Greg's ability to stand in front of somebody and like convince a group in this, I mean, take questions. He was funny and witty and charismatic, and I was like, "Holy shit, like this is incredible. This guy is," and as a rhetoric major and somebody who, they asked me when I played for the Eagles, they said, "What goes through your mind before you run through the stadium, when you're, standing there and they call your name and you take off running through the tunnel, what goes through your mind?" And I told them, Ave Caesar, moritur te salutant, which is the only Latin I remember, which is Hail Caesar, those of us about to die salute you,
Yeah.
which is what the gladiators would say.
Yeah.
And it was like a fucking mic drop. They were like, "What?" And I was like, that's what goes through my mind. So like to see him, and I was dude, I was impressed.
Mhm.
Personally, one-on-one, none of that luster. Like, I found him awkward and I found him insecure in this and like all these things, where I was like, wow, like this is so weird to be one-on-one with this guy.
Bert talks about this. Bert talks about you have three sides of a human, and one of those is ability to work a crowd, and another's ability to connect face to face with somebody. And I forgot the third one, but those two right now I'm thinking of are like very rare combination.
Is that ikigai where they talk about like the Japanese talk about you have three faces, the one that you see, that you're public facing, the one that your family sees, and then the one that nobody sees?
Bert is probably unaware of that. I think he's just kind of come to that conclusion through his own observations. But
So
I'm sure
there's
it's the same.
there's like in Japanese culture they have like I think it might be I might be messing this up. It might not be ikigai, but somebody I'm sure will fact check me. But they talk about three faces: the one that you show the public, the one that you show your close friends, and then the one that you show nobody. But Greg
Wow,
was
yeah.
like it was he was very curious, almost a little childlike in this. I mean, but it was just it wasn't what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to, so after that event, he called me and said, "Hey, like we got home and I got in the car, 2 days later, drove to Arizona, showed up with he and his family and his wife was there and she was pregnant, Lauren, and we sat down and like we came up with hatched this idea to create this deal. And what was wild is he had pitched people for years on doing this and had given people the opportunity to create this, and nobody really seized it. So he went home and, or I got done. I understood what he wanted, and I was like, well, I don't know shit about programming. I don't know really that much about training people because I had been on this other side.
Mhm.
So I had to like sit down and figure out what this thing looks like. And I did probably one of the greatest sea monkey, ant farm experiments ever done in human history, for the fact that I came up with a whole bunch of ideas on training, put them out on a free website, let it kind of marinate for 30 days, and then traveled the world for the next 9 years, teaching hundreds of seminars, putting people through a 2-day strength and conditioning seminar where I had people following my program versus people that hadn't been following my program and had been doing standard CrossFit. And I put them through a strength and conditioning diagnostic that looked like sprinting, change of direction, lifting weights, and dynamic movement and moving through space.
Mhm.
And I got an incredible chance to see why people could and couldn't do and where people failed at the margins of their
Wow.
experience.
Yeah.
And I
Which is something he coined, right?
yeah,
Which is a
yeah, his
great
dude, he said people fail at the margins of their experience.
yeah.
And so if you don't wanna fail, what that means is you have to extend your margin.
Yeah, that's
And,
great.
I basically that first year we taught 36 seminars around the globe. I just said, like, "Put this free website out." We had programming. I didn't really know what to program. I remember I talked to Mark Ripto. I went out and I visited Rip and, count him as a really good friend. And I sat down and I was like, "Hey, can you explain to me, this beginner kind of linear progression, Bill Starr?" So we sat for 3 days. We talked about Bill Starr. We talked about, his method, Texas, and this. I saw the linear progression. I understood the, volume and intensity and how he had been kind of couching it
Mhm.
because I only understood training on my side. Like I knew what we had done in high school,
Mhm.
obviously training with Zangus with singles, doubles, and triples.
Mhm.
And then the awful bodybuilding shit we did. And then when I did the powerlifting, and then we got into snatch, clean, and jerk with Todd Rice, and then what I'd done with Roth. So I kind of knew training from like this tip of the
Mhm.
spear. The problem is
Mhm.
I can't prescribe that training to normal
Mhm.
people.
Yes,
So
that's my
people would ask me like, "Oh, what'd you do for your training?" I'm like,
doesn't matter.
well, it doesn't matter because that's
Yeah,
not you.
yeah.
So what I did is I had different training exposure levels, amateur, collegiate, and professional is what I call them. And we, used a basic linear progression for the beginners. I had a kind of a more advanced template for the second one, and then obviously a more advanced
When
deal on the
people try
front
to
side.
put the Ripto stuff on more advanced trainers, and I'm like, "Wait,
No,
there's a
no,
reason he calls
was
it
it
starting
starting
strength."
strength?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
and I
reason.
remember talking to Mark, I'm like, he's done great in terms of, like, getting people strong and getting
Mhm.
them in the starting strength, but there's a more advanced template,
Mhm.
and, I had a bunch of, like I sat down, and, like, problem solver and, like, the ability to test things. I had different training groups, so I had an amateur, collegiate, and a professional training group, and we tested everything. We did this. Andy was actually, the intermediate one. CrossFit football was developed for Andy Stumpf. And then I did the professional. We had another guy doing the amateur, and we did all this stuff, and we figured out that, this is what the volume was, if we kept the workouts here and kind of mixed modal and, basically the entire power athlete program is built off of this idea of the blueprint of athleticism.
So we haven't covered power
Oh,
athlete yet.
okay. Oh, sorry. Right,
So but I
but
just I
yeah.
don't want people to
So
that's
so all of these ideas that I
yeah,
had on training, I field tested them in CrossFit
yeah.
football. And then I would sit down and write and think, and then I would have to go out and teach. So I would read, I would put stuff out, I would get feedback, I would write, talk to me, Johnny, different stuff. And then I would go out every weekend and I would show up and I'd have between 20 and 50 people every weekend showing up that were like, feed us, show us. And I'd
Yeah.
put them through this strength conditioning CrossFit football seminar to certify them. And I like did this for years. I mean, we worked with tens of thousands of athletes in real time.
Yeah.
And while I was doing it, I'm running this site and like I'm getting all this feedback and people are doing it. I mean, we had 17,000 hits that first day.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, it was huge.
Dude, it was massive.
Um,
And it was just like when people ask me how I was able to kind of figure this thing out as fast as I would, I just had more data points.
yeah.
I had
Oh,
more
cool.
exposure. I mean, can you imagine
Mhm.
giving away free program and then traveling the world and meeting all of the
Yeah.
people that did it, and then they come up to you and they give you all of these like
Yeah.
data points. Oh, I did this, I this,
It's
this.
like accelerated evolution.
Dude,
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
and
Yeah.
like I could never recreate this, and I could
Yeah.
never hope that anybody else could. The only guy that kind of did similar was Kelly Starrett.
Mhm.
You know, Kelly had so this is wild. Kelly worked for me on my first CrossFit football seminar, and he got up and presented, and our chemistry was so good.
He's similar to you. He's a good mind that can communicate ideas
Yeah.
very well.
So
Yeah.
Kelly had been pitching CrossFit on doing a mobility kind of like his PT stuff for years. They didn't want to do it. I brought Kelly in, and we presented together. CrossFit HQ was at my first seminar. They immediately called him the next day, and they gave him his own event because they didn't want us to like unite our
That's
brand. And so they pulled Kelly out, and so Kelly's like, "If I hadn't have come taught that with you, it would have never, like, they weren't gonna let us link up
So
our wagons."
people that were drawn to CrossFit also tended to be drawn to Kelly, and
Mhm.
I feel like he saved a lot of CrossFitters.
Dude, it was
You know what I
like there
mean?
was a burning house and Kelly was running in. Part of
Yeah.
my, some of my trepidation and, like, anger towards Glassman had to be how they treated him at the end, and more importantly, a letter that Glassman sent to him, which, Kelly forwarded on that was like, "Man, if somebody sent me this letter, I would have probably called them and said, 'Hey, we're meeting out, out back because I'm gonna fucking beat your face in senseless.'" Greg is a vindictive and has a
Yeah.
extremely well conditioned, very sharp wit, and has the ability to say some fucked up shit. That if you say some stuff like that to people, you're probably going to get your ass beat.
I mean,
And
Kelly, dude, I can imagine. Like Kelly just seems like such a happy, good-natured
dude,
individual
he's
that
one of the best.
he's brought so much to the
Yeah.
community with what he's
Well,
done.
just the world.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Kelly is like if you go back and you look at those original kind of videos he did on Mobwad, where he was doing those kind of daily stuff. I mean, I'm in a bunch of that stuff. It was funny. I saw one the other day, and I couldn't believe Kelly had hair, and I saw myself, and I mean, because I was in my like early 30s, right?
Yeah.
And but no, Kelly and Juliet have been
Yeah. I
some
love
of
he's very original in how he looks at things too. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, no, he can't, yeah, there's some of the and I equate this with CrossFit too. Some of the best people I've met in my life, I met through CrossFit. One, I met my wife when she was coming to train with us. I met Kelly, Rob
Yeah.
Wolf. I mean, these people are some of my, Andy Stumpf. I mean, some of my best friends in the world, and the people like I, count as my closest confidants.
CrossFit, first of all, I do want to get your take on it, but CrossFit to me, at the higher levels, some amazing athletes
Yeah.
and very in shape people. But then you have the entry level, and I know they like to throw out the stat that CrossFit injury rates aren't any higher than other activities, but you're not comparing apples to apples. And then the
Yeah.
Olympic lifts to exhaustion,
Yeah.
plyometrics from people that are,
Yeah.
the kipping pull-ups, which can be great. I don't think they're goofy like people think. They're not really suitable for most people.
Well, I think I am like I don't really have any like resentment of CrossFit.
Yeah.
I feel like if somebody wants to go in and they wants to lift weights and they want to run and do these things, like great. Like the coach should have the prerequisite skill set to figure out
Yeah.
how to like ratchet somebody up slowly over time.
Mhm.
Like the age old days of like Fight Club where you just show up and you're going to get your
That's what it
fucking ass
feels
kicked.
like. It's
Well,
like
no, I mean that was
40-year-old dude day 2 doing box jumps and
yeah,
snatches.
or you're gonna do, Murph with 100, pull-ups and
Yeah.
this. I mean, like you old school CrossFit was like it was actually
If it
like
didn't break you, you'd be in shape.
dude, there were dudes with rhabdo, people got shattered.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a time for only like the absolute committed, decisive, focused people. And like the problem is so one of the issues I ran into was CrossFit talked about the 10 elements of fitness. It's like 10 pieces of fitness. And one of them was strength. I believe that strength is the platform on which all life is built on.
Mhm.
So there are 10 elements, or there's not 10 elements. All those elements of fitness
Mhm.
are exemplified and like sit up higher the stronger you are.
Yes.
Right? Like like
So true.
if you run fast, you get stronger. Yeah. If you get stronger, do you necessarily run fast? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on who you are.
Mhm.
But all of these things with, balance, precision, and movement, everything gets better when you're
Everything's
stronger.
easier when you're stronger.
Yeah.
The world gets lighter when you get stronger.
Yeah. Like, yeah. I mean, if you want to make shit easier, get stronger.
Mhm.
And so the problem is, and I think it's because of Rip's dogma. So Rip got to CrossFit pretty early. And if you get a chance to meet Rip, Rip is comes as advertised. He is a curmudgeon. He is prickly. He's this, and like there's only his way, his method. And we had a great. We've done a couple of funny podcasts where we don't agree, but because I have mutual respect, we're able to like entertain each other's ideas.
Yeah.
And he doesn't treat me, when we did it, people are like, "Oh, this." I'm like, "No, we're friends," and he would never disrespect me because I would never disrespect him.
Yeah.
It's not who I am. But I think he got to it, and there was such a focus on the strength. And I think when I came into it, I was like, you can be strong, you can be powerful, you can be agile, you can move well, but you have to train in such a way that necessitates athleticism.
Mhm.
And CrossFit's technology has always been increased work capacity at broad time modal domains,
Mhm.
right? What does that really mean? The ability to do more stuff in shorter time
Mhm.
is their kind of recipe for what is fitness, right?
Mhm.
And I thought about for CrossFit football, which the reason that we changed the CrossFit football name was because I was teaching nothing of CrossFit,
Mhm.
and their brand is CrossFit. They have a brand, and if you don't defend your brand, then you lose your brand.
Yeah.
And the brand was very specific: increased work capacity, broad time modal domains, and functional movements performed at high intensity. And I did not support any of that.
Mhm.
So the fact that they actually licensed me to with a name that had CrossFit football, but yet didn't support their brand in any way
Mhm.
was confusing to me even.
Mhm.
And I remember at one point sitting with their lawyer and being like, "How have you let me do this long?" And he's like, "Oh, you understand?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not a fool." And he's like, "Oh, thank God." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I don't preach anything of what you preach."
Yeah.
And that's when we kind of broke away. And there was a sports specific. They gave it this terrible name, and it should have been. It was actually, you're going to laugh at this. The name Power Athlete came from Greg Glassman.
Really?
So we were sitting at a dinner. Greg would, when he was having like a big problem, like a big kind of passive aggressive blowout, and we got into this whole thing. It was it came down to money and like percentages and seminars, and we were teaching a bunch, and they were this, and they wanted more cut, and like it just got to this like really kind of toxic level. So he called this big dinner. So I brought my brothers, and Greg shows up, and he's got his harem and all of his people, and his his little sycophants, like kind of like in Starship Troopers, the little brain bugs, like
Yeah.
the little people around. And so he's sitting there, and he's getting housed. Like he's getting housed. Like he's like 6 margaritas in.
Yeah.
And my brothers and I are like, had no drinks, just sitting there, just watching him, and he's like getting hammered. And he's like, "I have a
You always
huge."
got to be one drink behind the person you're talking to. You
Yeah.
know what I
So
mean?
my deal, my brother tapped me. He's like, "We'll have drinks later. Fucking let this guy just fucking run his mouth."
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, and he says to me, and he's like, "I have a huge fucking problem with CrossFit football." And I'm like, "Great, what is it?" Because I had heard all this stuff on the backside.
Mhm.
Like they, from the day that we launched, there was this like directive to try to like kill us and to like do anything they could to like water it down and this, but short of just break up with me.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like, "I have a huge problem." So CrossFit football's tagline was forging powerful athletes. And he was, CrossFit's was forging elite athletes. And we get in and he goes, "I have a huge fucking problem with you forging fucking powerful athletes." All right. People would rather be powerful than elite. And that's a huge problem.
Wow.
And he's like, "I want you to change it to power athletes, forging power athletes."
Wow.
And I was like, wrote that one down and went home and bought the URL, and started
Yeah.
basically changed my whole company, which had been CrossFit Football LLC, to Power Athlete LLC.
Yeah.
And that was basically at that point, I was like, "Oh, fuck, dude, this is solid gold. Thanks, Greg." And Power Athlete came from that conversation. And
Wow.
like we got done, the whole thing went, sideways in this, and we agreed to disagree and whatever. And then we kind of went on our way. I never changed. I don't remember if I changed the tagline or not, but Power Athlete at that point, like that became my URL, like that became everything.
Yeah.
And I was like, because that's what we do. We're
Yeah.
forging power athletes, not powerful athletes.
Yeah.
So he suggested it, and I was like, "Hey man, that's
That's
solid
awesome.
gold.
That's
I'm
an
going to
awesome
take
story.
it." And
Yeah.
and in real talk, like it should have been CrossFit football. It should have been, Power Athlete. and we should have done that from day one, and it would have been less confusing to the community.
Yeah.
They would have figured where it fit in, and I think because the first,
I mean, guys like me that didn't actually look and see what you were actually teaching and hate on it, Like,
well, you should have hated on it. I
just
remember
name.
telling him, like, dude, I'm going to teach a seminar called CrossFit Football. People are going to think we're teaching blocking and throwing and shit.
Yeah.
And, I listened to, who's the strength coach for Arizona Cardinals? Buddy Morse. So I got invited to, Dave Tate had this big kind of strength coaches thing, and he invited us. Buddy Morris stands up and shits on CrossFit Football by name for like 20 minutes. And I'm like, fucking get back, coach. Because in the NFL, the strength coach's job is to like get people back. Yeah. So I'm like, the fucking get back coach from the Arizona Cardinals is shitting on me. Yeah. And all I'm trying to do is save people that are burning out of a building by making them stronger.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, I didn't also realize when I got into it that there was so much historical hate of CrossFit and Greg Glassman by this standard strength conditioning kind of like, icons.
Well, I think so what they saw was for somebody just trying to get fit, it's fine. But as far as like learning movement patterns, learning skill, progressive overload, the concepts that they knew worked and built athletes, like you said, everything was equal to CrossFit. So there was no progression. There was no.
But part of the problem is fitness is personal.
Yeah.
So think about that.
Yes.
Right. What your definition of fitness and what you need for fitness might be very different than mine.
Fitness is not an exercise term. It's how well you thrive in your environment.
Yes. Yeah. So that's why what felt weird to me when they started talking about like fitness, if you think about like, you look at it from like an evolutionary point, like fitness is your ability to have children, right? Yeah. Like from an evolutionary standpoint, like, okay, if, you have 10 kids,
to the next generation.
Yeah. Right. So fitness to me was personal. And what I thought was confusing was that they were trying to put this like quantitative measure on fitness that if I can do more work, I'm fit. And I'm like, for what though? Yeah. There has to be an outcome. Like the fitness that I needed to play in the NFL is very different than the fitness that you would need to be a marathon runner or a triathlete or a special forces or this or SOCOM or, all these things. It's so the issue I got into, and this is where, as I was looking at like, CrossFit Football, which morphed into Power Athlete, what Power Athlete's technology was fostering and developing athleticism.
Yeah.
Because athleticism is universal. And then I'll tell you why, right? If you watch an athlete, we're going to, this is probably going to come out after the Super Bowl, but you can turn on the Olympics, you can turn on the Super Bowl, you can turn on football, you can do anything. And you can watch somebody move and know whether or not they're athletic almost immediately.
So true.
So we have this ability to sense symmetry, right? Like if a pretty girl walks in, she might not be my type, but we're going to agree like, something's different. That girl's a 12. She walks in. Front engine V12 Ferrari. I'm not a Ferrari guy. But like when you see that car, like the symmetry and the sound and the balance and everything, you're like, shit, that's pretty amazing looking. Now,
fluidity, timing, body awareness.
Really the ability to separate the upper body from the lower body sprint. Exactly. You watch Odell Beckham Jr. catch that deal and breaks the internet. Right?
I always knew a linebacker was done when he couldn't do that. Yeah. When like Brian Urlacher had to turn like this, I was like, he's done. He can't.
I played against Urlacher a lot. I liked playing against Urlacher. He was real tall.
Yeah.
But like the ultimate trump card, the pretty girl in the room, whatever it is, the Ferrari in the parking lot, is athleticism. And what I figured out is I came up with my own definition of athleticism. Somebody asked that on your social media. I saw, how do you define athleticism? The ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task.
It's a pretty good definition.
That was the definition that we coined. And because I needed to teach what CrossFit Football and really Power Athlete on the backside, what the technology that I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to foster and develop athleticism. And if I understand the components of athleticism, I can break it into pieces, which is really that chunking model, which is how people learn to it's how people learn, right? So if you want to learn to read, we learn letters. Letters become words, words become sentences, sentences become paragraphs, paragraphs become, pages in novels.
Make the thing small enough, slow it down enough, and do it enough, and it can become perfect.
Yeah. And there's really only 7 primal movements. The body can only do 7 things, right? You can X-axis, you can Y-axis, and you can Z-axis, and then we can vertical push, vertical pull, and there's 4 in the upper body. The combining of those 7 primal patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task, and your ability to
it's like the primary colors. With those primary colors, you can
do anything. Yeah, right. And I watched this, and then to break it down into pieces, and then create proficiency in that chunking model. It's how you develop athletes.
and I'm not ragging it because there are a lot of things I love about CrossFit, like we discussed, but it's like they add, you know how the term speed hides dysfunction?
Mhm.
They add speed and fatigue much too quickly before patterns have been firmly established on the autonomic system.
Well,
Yeah.
so one of Greg's points to me was, "Do you think CrossFit is an athletic form of training?" So the CrossFit sycophants are gonna listen to this, but what they don't know is that I had a lot of personal one-on-one time with Greg that they'll never have. At Greg's height, when he was literally in the beginning of this, not like, "I've lost my company, I'm bitter at the world, I'm doing all this
We
other
said
stuff."
something off camera that directly, like they said, Greg never said that,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he personally said that
Yeah,
to you.
yeah, we have individual conversations with things that I wrote down at that moment because I knew that they were special. When he asked me if CrossFit, so these morons, and they can chirp all they want, say it doesn't exist. I met Saban when he came and filmed the Every Second Counts and hung out with us, and he was just a filmmaker
Yeah,
before he became whatever his position is now. So,
yeah.
like, I knew these people. There was Saban and Carrie, and like, it's a different time. But what Greg asked me, "Do you think CrossFit is an athletic form of training?" I said, "No, it's nothing but sagittal plane bilateral hip hinging." So you hinge in a sagittal plane, that's it. Everything looks like hinging and going forward. Kipping pull up, this. I mean, every move was a bilateral hip hinge.
I got a term I use, sagittal plane warrior. It's like,
Yeah.
ooh,
Everything can get done in a hallway.
mhm,
And the reason being is, look at where Greg failed the margin of experience. He was a gymnast.
mhm,
That's it.
yep,
Right? He was good on the rings, all
mhm.
straight ahead. I mean, there's
And
rotations.
not a ton of ground-based activity
Yeah.
either. So, a gymnast, which are they're phenomenal athletes,
Yeah.
only a small percentage of their activities are
Ground based.
ground-based through kinetic chain.
Yeah. The vault and the
Yeah,
floor.
yeah,
But if you notice in the vault, right, obviously they have rotation. Everything is all of these different
yes,
planes, everything is going forward.
yeah,
There's no lateral movement. There's no transverse plane. They're not planning going this way. I mean, so in reality, the programming that he designed was a programming that he was able to do,
yeah,
which is people fail to margin of experience.
yeah.
Now, whether or not he trained in
He didn't
this,
see his own,
well,
you
but
know,
it didn't matter.
yeah,
And so this is where we get into that quote: "The best trick, Glassman ever pulled was convincing the world that work capacity and athleticism were the same." Because what he talked about is athleticism, athletes, they have to go compete in sports and they have to test. So whether or not somebody's athletic and you train them for, that's a completely different thing. If you're trying to run a gym model, it's a lot easier just to have
yeah,
somebody do nothing but bilateral hip hinging and smoke them to fucking death and then show them, "We did this workout 3 minutes. Now you did it in two. You're a
mhm.
fitter version."
And the thing is, they get in good shape, they develop big muscles, they have abs, they're lean, and so when you see them move and you see them demonstrate this extraordinary work capacity, people are like, "That's an athlete," until they get outside of that comfort zone.
Well, so then what happened was they go to the CrossFit Games and they put the zigzag run in.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden, you see people go to plant. They can't stand on one leg. But then all of a sudden, you see the girls that played soccer
yeah,
and the Rich Fronings and all these guys that had
yeah,
played sports their
yeah.
entire life. All of
Yes.
a sudden, were able to move for sports.
Those are elite
Yeah,
athletes, you know?
and like
They
no,
picked up CrossFit late in life.
yeah,
Yeah,
no discounting them. Like those
yeah,
guys are fucking savages.
yeah,
Some of these girls, like I will say that CrossFit's greatest contribution has to be the pedestal of female athletes.
yeah.
I look at these.
Performance-based
Dude,
training for females, yeah,
I would take every one of these girls home.
yeah,
Like I like remember seeing like it's funny because you'll see like Brooke Wells and Danielle, I forgot her name, Brandon, and like these girls like big, strong, this like in the, like, I'll see dudes rip on them in the comments. I'm like, dude, I would like if
I love it because it got
like a couple 100 years ago, every one of these girls would have
yeah,
been in my village. I would have taken them all. I like I see them and I'm like, dude, like these chicks are absolutely amazing to me.
I like it because it got women focused on performance and
Yeah.
numbers and metrics and knowing their times.
Yeah, and like Jack, like my wife is phenomenal shape, and she competed in the CrossFit Games. Like those are the type of girls that I've always dated, and the girls that I like. So for me, it's like going to a steakhouse. I'm like, I love all these steaks. I'm
Yeah.
like, and then what's funny is I hear guys like, oh, these. I'm like, what was the age old one with Sir Mix-a-Lot where he's like, leave all those women alone. I'll scoop them up and bring them home. Like, I think this is the best thing that ever happened. Like what they did in terms of putting female athletes front and center, teaching girls that it's cool to have muscles and lift weights and do things and to bust their ass. I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So for his contribution in terms of getting barbells in people's hands, what he did for female athletes and that, like, I can't discount him. And I'm sure in his some fucking lunacy of like the fact that he's crazy as a shithouse rat, he's super mad at me. But like, whether or not I like you as a person, that doesn't discount your impact
Yeah.
that you had on the world. And like, we're better for it.
Yeah.
Now, like the problem is what I've focused on doing is as I learn, I evolve. And if I made a mistake and I go forward, like there's just constant evolution and we're constantly testing it through programming and different people. I took on training the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players because I'd always thought about athleticism from a standing position, like playing football and sport. But all of a sudden now I'm like, oh shit, these guys are in a 360 gyroscope. They're on their back.
Mhm.
Does my model of athleticism apply to a sport where you're,
Mhm.
supine pro here, this, and like it did.
Yeah.
And we worked with these guys and I was like, shit, dude, this is universal. So my desire to continue to push and to test,
Yeah.
and if there's a mistake or I didn't get something wrong, like my favorite now is all the talk on hypertrophy, all the research that Chris Beardsley and these guys are coming out with hypertrophy. I mean, we figured this out 10 years ago, right? Like all the junk volume and fatigue and this. I mean, like it's pretty interesting. I'll have people pop them that are like big, Paul Carter's a friend of mine, like that are big into Paul's stuff and his hypertrophy, and they'll jump into our programs and be like, all of this stuff fits within the current research. And I'm like, yeah, we backed into this motherfucker.
Yeah.
Like we haven't, we've been doing this for a long time
Yeah.
and using things like compensatory acceleration and a lot of Fred Hatfield stuff. And like you said, man, like I talked to Charlie Francis on the phone. He designed, we talked about speed and training in the no man's land and training and this and EMS. So I just had an incredible opportunity to work with some of the best people on the planet.
What are some things you took from Charlie Francis?
You can't get fast running slow. Train fast, be fast. And what was fascinating is, so Charlie talked about this like kind of dead window, right? Like
Stay away from the middle.
yeah, you're right. You're either running faster than 92% or you're training at 75 recovery tempo runs. But what's fascinating, and he made a point where he's like, where's the majority of strength built? If you were to figure out, like if you were to chart all the reps over time, it's that middle window.
Yeah.
It's between 75 and 92.
The rest is just practice.
Right. But
Yeah.
then the speed is here. So then he said, he goes, speed or so strength is not the driver for speed. It is up into a point. Once somebody's strong, now you're talking about technique
Mhm.
and running fast and this. And so he talked about, this might be the no man's land, but this is where strength is built.
Mm.
So like that was kind of if you
Yeah.
put this on,
Yeah.
like, somebody, if they get stronger, will they get faster up into a point?
Yeah.
And then at some point the strength becomes a negative feedback.
Because of extra weight and everything too. And
Yeah.
and it's hard to intramuscular coordination gets harder. And
So for me, in
it's
the
funny because like
offseason-
with the young kids, I'll put them through sets of 10 and they'll get faster
Yeah.
because they're so young.
well, they get
Yeah.
faster at everything.
Yeah.
That's
They
what
jog
training.
and get faster because
Well, yeah, but that's training beginner, right? Everything
Exactly.
works up until the point it doesn't.
yeah, that's right.
But so I mean, and then Charlie helped me with a bunch of the EMS protocols. So I ruptured my patellar tendon, and I couldn't get my quad to fire. So Mauro De Pasquale, which is another guy I worked with, the father of carb cycling and the anabolic diet. So Mauro gave me my first supplement deal. He put me in touch with what's his name in Colorado. We brought him up earlier. Charles Balquin.
Yeah, yeah.
So he put me in touch with Charles. Charles and I's discussion wasn't very fruitful. He just basically told me, well, he's since passed away, I can say it now, but he basically, all we went through was all the drugs I wasn't taking.
It's funny. And now, no hate on Charles Paul. He brought a lot of good things, just like Glassman.
Yeah.
People hate on Charlie Francis because of the steroid scandal. And people love Poliquin. And I'm like, he was a
Yeah.
big guy that was
Yeah.
big on drugs.
Well,
so is Louis Simmons, though. I mean, but
Yeah.
great minds.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, so my conversation with him goes, and he basically told me all the drugs I wasn't taking.
yeah.
And so I called Mauro back, and I'm like, this is my conversation. He's like, put me in touch with Charlie. So I talked to Charlie. We talked on the phone, and I called him, answered on a speakerphone, and smoked cigarettes, and we went through this whole thing. He laid it out, told me where to get these EMS devices, and he's like, this thing's going to work for 12 weeks. You got to hit it. And so I'd use these EMS protocols. My quad started
Way
firing.
ahead of his time, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my quad fired. I came back and started, I'd ruptured my patellar tendon. They told me my career was finished. I start doing Charlie's, stuff that he had wrote for me, and started doing more stuff. And then all of a sudden, my quad wires back up. I start 16 game set next year, and then went on and played for the next 9 years.
That's crazy.
And
I love Charlie Francis too because his focus on the nervous system. He was one of the first people
Yeah.
to really acknowledge that. And then also neural toning. Like
Yeah.
he talked about his athletes, and they had to have a neural tone. They couldn't be. You didn't want to give them. He gave them like a specialized massage before the races that wasn't too deep and relaxing, but it's more
Yeah.
like a tapping massage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really interesting guy.
and he was big on fatigue.
Yeah.
Like everybody tries to get there with junk volume, that there's like, it's Jason Statham, which is kind of wild, I don't know if actually he said this quote, but they attribute it to him, where he talked about the body is a lot like dynamite, that if you were to take, dynamite and you were able to hit it with a hammer, nothing would happen. But if all of a sudden you hit it with something really explosive and violent, the dynamite will explode. And that training, and he talked about the human bodies are like dynamite. And so I don't know if like he actually said that or they attributed the quote, but I saw it somewhere. And that was very similar to Charlie's deal, is
Yeah.
like, you hit it hard. And the minute that you're running 92%, and the minute that you dip behind, you either rest longer and you run one more. And if it's below, you're
Yeah.
done. You might only get 2 reps. And the problem
He
is,
was big on shutting training sessions
Yeah.
down.
all the time we go out and run. If we
Yeah.
were running slow, we didn't run anymore.
Mhm.
And then it became, you do not have the zone 2 bank. So this is what we got into with Joel Jameson, who, I had him on the
his
podcast.
book, man, I love his books. The conditioning book opened my eyes.
Oh yeah. So I still do all the Charlie Francis med ball conditioning.
Yeah.
It was hilarious because that's all in our programs. I went out to Westside. So I met Louis Simmons, many years, called him on the phone when I was in college. My roommate, Kevin Doherty, had these Westside barbell videos. And in it, there was a number at the end. So we go up to the coach's office. I call the number, and Lou, and then Doris
awesome.
answers. And
I can't believe you talked to Louis Simmons.
yeah, and he helped me map out how to bench 500. When I met Lou later, he didn't remember. I was kind of bummed, but then he said he did. I don't know if he ever did, but I had a bench at 500, and we talked about the dynamic work in this. And Zangus had one of Louis' original reverse hypers in his garage. So I had used the reverse hyper since I was like, going on like fucking 30 years now. And, he talked about, Louis Simmons and Westside and this, and, we saw the magazines. So I had, started doing CrossFit football. Louis gets kind of approached by CrossFit and was kind of in there, like within their periphery. And it came down to, and you're going to laugh at this, and this is another one that nobody knows, but Glassman didn't really necessarily know what the training he was doing was doing. He just knew that like this was causing an effect.
Mhm.
And it was actually Rob Wolf that was like, I think we're doing GPP work, like what the Westside guys are
That's
doing.
funny.
Right? Because
Yeah.
here's the problem.
Yeah.
Glassman has skewed anything that looked like standard strength conditioning. He
Yeah.
just thumbed his nose and said, no sports scientist, no
Mhm.
strength conditioning has ever contributed. It's all fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
Which is nonsense. Like,
Yeah.
right. But and so Rob was actually like, I think what we're doing is GPP work, like the Westside
That's
guys.
so funny.
So then all of a sudden Glassman globbed
Which,
on.
I mean, the Soviets have known about that for
Of course.
eons.
Yeah, if you just had to read, Verkhoshansky and Sadaskorsky and
Mm-hmm.
this idea of zone 2 and GPP and then SPP, yeah, like this is the natural progression.
Yeah.
That's where all of a sudden he globbed on. It was like, oh, we're the sport of GPP, which is an oxymoron in itself.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
biggest little city, the sport of general
sport.
physical preparedness doesn't make any fucking
That's
sense.
funny.
Yeah, like it's like CrossFit football.
Yeah.
Right? These are like, these are oxymorons.
Yeah.
And and that was Rob Wolf. And the funny part is, I forgot where it was, but Rob has the screen caps of them like in some private discussion. And he's like, I think what we're doing is the conditioning stuff, like Westside where they drag sleds, like GPP. And then Greg was like, that's it. We're doing general physical preparedness. And that was how that whole thing started, was Rob Wolf. So Rob knows where all the bodies are buried.
That's funny.
And he has
man.
kept all these in screen caps.
Yeah, I think the thing we've forgotten in sports today, if there's one thing, is the importance of GPP.
Yeah.
It's either, what's funny to me is we have a sense that we shouldn't do too many sets of heavy squats or heavy lifts in general. Nobody's going to prescribe, unless they're like a Bulgarian or somebody, like, 10 sets of 2 at 95% of your 1 rep max.
Yeah.
But then we forget that applies to top end speed as well. They'll have them go out and run 40 40s. It's like nobody's getting faster running 40 40s.
Well, I mean, so the only thing that the greatest impact that Charlie made was you don't get fast running slow.
Yeah.
So the only way you get fast is train fast, be fast.
And when you're on your 25th 40, you're not running fast
no.
anymore.
And so, but that reserve and your ability to generate speed comes from the bank and the well at which you build, which is at zone 2, which, we had Joel Jameson on and we talked about, his Morpheus and basically building this. And he made an interesting point, which I hadn't thought about, where he said that the well of zone 2 capacity is bottomless.
Yeah.
So, on his Morpheus deal, I'm like anywhere, I try to get like 150, 180 minutes a week of his like, for me, it's anything south of 148. Right. So my range is like, some which is more than what I thought. So, if you go based upon age, it'd probably be way lower. But then the problem is that very few people actually do a max heart rate test.
Yes.
And I got mine up to, I think I was 199, 200. And so if I had gone off of age, I would have been in the 120s, which would be too low. So for
Yeah.
me, it actually like that type of stuff made sense.
Yeah.
But I know that two things happen as we age. We lose the ability to recruit motor units.
Mhm.
So that's where lifting heavy weights becomes, and we lose mitochondrial density.
Mhm.
So mitochondrial density increases with having a large aerobic base. So being able to help all these autonomic systems by
VO2
having,
max and motor unit recruitment.
Yeah.
We use motor units.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting that Andy Galpin, and he talks about this,
had
about
him on our
how,
podcast too. Yeah, no, Andy.
oh man, it's amazing that as people age, because the all or none principle, and you either turn it on or you turn it off.
Yeah.
And as we age, those motor units die and they'll get taken over by slow twitch units.
Yeah.
And you have these big segments of your muscles that are slow
So
twitch.
this is another interesting piece of physiology. So what I became fascinated with CrossFit is when you start getting into these longer duration workouts, what happens is the body gets a conversion of fast twitch muscle fibers to slow twitch muscle
Mhm.
fibers to be able to survive this stuff.
Mhm.
And the problem that I ran into was that when I was training for my last year in the NFL, I was using, and this is what other fucking morons forget, I actually used CrossFit main site, was training at a CrossFit gym, using, like some main site conditioning workouts. I'd lift weights, I'd do all my sprint stuff, and then I'd go there in the evening and we do some CrossFit workouts.
Mhm.
I was doing that stuff preparing to go back to the NFL. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I can raise my conditioning, if I can get my GPP higher, then I should be able to have this fucking capacity. So I was field testing this on
So
myself.
you're overly dependent on like the glycolytic system and things
So
like
then
that.
the
Yeah.
problem is all of a sudden I go compete in the CrossFit Games. 7 days later, I go out, and I remember I got in my stance when I first got to the Patriots, right? Like I went through, crushed the conditioning test, everything's great, passed the physical. I get out in the pads, and very first play, all of a sudden they went sit hut, and I was like super slow. I was a step slow, and I couldn't get on my fucking stance. And instantly my stomach dropped. And I was like, fuck, I aired too much on that side and I
Mhm.
lost it, and it took me a little bit of like anticipation. I was able to like make up for it, but I knew the training was wrong. And when CrossFit football came in, I was like, I don't want another professional athlete
Yeah.
to fall on this sword and fuck it up. And the New Orleans Saints did, no Sean Moreno, a bunch of these guys. So it was unfortunate, but
I hope people can fully grasp that concept. If you spend too long in the middle, too much volume in that glycolytic zone, it's going to hinder your top end
Yes.
performance.
Yes.
Your body will adapt to survive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and so when I started working the jiu-jitsu guys, because this is really fascinating, they become so good at their task
Mhm.
that they are able to
Relax.
execute their tasks at like a reduced
Yeah.
heart rate.
It's crucial.
So all we ended up doing was lifting heavy weights,
Mhm.
doing a bunch of rotation and plyometrics and jumps. And then we started doing a bunch of like high end register, echo bike, Tabata, superhuman protocol, I
Mhm.
call it, but a bunch of like high register stuff
Mhm.
because I put the Morpheus, I started checking their heart rates, and I was monitoring all their stuff. And I'm like, dude, you guys never are getting into these upper registers.
Mhm.
And they weren't doing anything that looked like heavy, and they weren't doing ballistic. I mean, so all of the
It's the
plyometrics.
same way with like things like football. It's like a lot of times you're not in top speed during a game. You have to do that
Yeah.
consciously outside of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but I also never went into a, season one game. You go, you train the whole off season, you show up to training camp and you're fucking dying.
Mhm.
Right. Like, because you're not in football shape, and there's only one way to replicate football shape. It's fucking playing football.
Just like there's only one way to represent or replicate MMA.
Yeah.
You have to roll. You know
And
what I mean?
yeah. In jits, like I can be in the best shape in the world, but all of a sudden you get a guy on top of you that knows top pressure and how to smash you
And how to relax.
and
all
how to
that stuff.
relax and how to
Yeah.
get frames and do all this stuff. Like,
I
dude,
always tell a kid, I was like, never skip a practice to come to me. Don't ever skip
Yeah.
a practice.
I mean, and or these guys like, do you remember a receiver we had at Kansas City named Johnny Morton?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So Johnny Morton had a professional MMA fight.
Really?
Yeah. It was at the Coliseum. And when he was prepping for this MMA fight, Johnny had like a perfect grill. His like teeth were perfect.
Oh, no.
Face was perfect. Good looking dude. And as he was watching his training, he looked great. We went to the boxing thing and he was doing this. And, I'd boxed. So we were going in, we were working the bags and the hands. And I asked him, I'm like, how many fucking, like, have you gotten sparred with anybody? Like put the headgear on and taken some shots? And he's like, nah, man, I don't want to mess this up. So he goes out for this fucking,
Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the nose.
dude, and he got his
Yeah.
fucking teeth busted up, and
Oh,
that guy
shit, man,
fucking
that
peppered
sucks,
him in
man.
the face, and he went down because he had never taken those shots.
Yeah.
You have to know what it tastes like to get fucking hit in the mouth, and you're tasting your own blood. I mean, the Fight Club, like, do you really know yourself until you're drinking a pint in your own blood?
Exactly.
I mean, you got to know what that. I
I
mean,
love how all dudes think they can fight and they haven't been in a fight in years.
Oh.
Like, how are you so confident in ability to do something you haven't practiced?
dude, the boxing thing. I mean, this happened to me. This is kind of wild. not, I mean, if I could tell a million of these stories, but I had a guy named Craig Douglas on the podcast, and Craig's a former NAR kind of undercover cop who teaches some really high level shooting kind of combatives instructional for something called it's called South NARC. So he comes, does the podcast, and he goes, "Man, you should come to one of our courses." I'm like, "Great, I'd love to shoot." Right. So, and I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to come." You know, people ask me to do it, I'm going to show up. You ask me to come on a podcast, I come on the podcast because I show up if people ask me. It's what I hate about NFL players and pro athletes is they're so fucking flaky.
That's
Oh, yeah,
true.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah, hit
Yeah.
me up. And then
Yeah.
fucking, you can't get them there.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if you ask me and I say I'll be there, I'll be there. And I'm not going to be late. I was a few minutes late here, but it fucking drives me crazy. So he asked me like, "Hey, you want to do a seminar?" I'm like, "Great." So like, I don't hear from him for a couple months. He like texts me and he's like, "Hey, we're having a seminar in Austin this weekend." And it's like Thursday. And I'm like, "Fuck, when is this?" He's like, "It starts Friday night, it's Saturday and Sunday." And I'm like, "What do I need?" He's like, "A gun, 200 rounds, a cup, and a mouthpiece." And I was like, "All right, this sounds like a party." So we
That's
show
awesome.
up and it's literally like we put on this fight
Yeah.
gear and we're literally fist fighting. And on my feet, I'm fucking killing these dudes. All of a sudden, they put me on my back and they put this big dude, Nick, who was like 6 foot. He used to be like 350 and now he was like 290, 280. But you know, like when dudes were kind of like heavy like that, they got a lot of like loose skin, almost they're
Mhm.
like water weenies.
Mhm.
So this dude basically they put him in side control and we got guns and we're fighting and he fucking takes my gun. I still have the scar right here from the sim that he put in my shoulder and there's one right here in my belly button.
Yeah.
He killed me.
Yeah.
And I
Fucking
was
pisses you off, right?
Oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
I was so mad because, dude, on my feet, like I was killing these dudes, one-on-one fighting, like I can do that. On my back, I was like a turtle.
Yeah.
And so one of the instructors, Scotty Oates, is one of Shanji's black belts. Is like, "Hey man, you got to learn some fucking ground fighting. You got to learn to fight on your back." And for me as an NFL player, if I'm on my back and you're on top of me, everything has gone wrong and I'm getting cut.
Mhm.
So like that moment of like somebody on top of me was like a fear of mine.
Yeah.
And then I had this conscious decision, like, well, shit, like, what if something happens and I get into a tussle and some dude ends up on top of me and I can't fight my way out? Like, this is completely flawed. Everything I have in my mind about fucking physical readiness.
It's rare to even be able to recognize that. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
dude,
Yeah.
I because I was like, all right, like one-on-one fist fight, I got a problem unless this dude has a fucking batter gun. I don't give a shit what you have, like what martial art, I know, fuck you.
Yeah.
And I was like a good street fighter. I beat up the toughest dudes in the NFL. Like I go toe to toe. I can take a lot of blows. Like I know what I got.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm stuck on my back.
Yeah.
And so then I went up and I started training with Shanji. And I have since like adopted this to be able to be comfortable on the bottom.
Yeah.
And now like, if I got thrown down, I pulled somebody on top of me, like I wouldn't be, but that's
You have
also
to expose yourself to the stimulus.
yeah. I mean, but that's like always be a white belt. That's that kind of beginner
Yes.
mentality when I realize here's a hole in my game. Me fucking stroking my ego and pumping myself and talking about I'll beat in my chest
We
isn't
don't
gonna
grow
happen.
where we're comfortable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, but with the training and everything, like there always has to be this feeling of I'm growing and getting better, and if I'm stagnant, I'm going in reverse. And I think what happened with CrossFit, to some extent, to bring it back to that, is once they had the recipe figured out, there was no evolution of it.
Yeah.
And then what they did is they turned it and then they had all of these amazing people come to it that tried to continue to grow this thing. The people like Rob Wolf and Kelly Starrett and all these, Rich Froning and what he's been done.
Mhm.
And all they did was they just raged and fought against it and shit on it in this
Mhm.
because it wasn't the word exactly the same as what had been handed down to them over it.
Yeah.
And I think the prickliness and what you feel is their inability to continue to allow it to grow.
They are not adaptable. Yeah.
No, and it's become irrelevant.
Yeah.
So if you don't continue to grow and evolve, I mean, the games is, just watching basically these people just get absolutely obliterated and suffered in this, like, putting people on a row for 4 hours, like nobody wants that shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it just
I-
became, like the only people that were spectators of this were people that had done the training.
Yeah.
It's kind of like jujitsu to some extent. Like when you go to a jits event or like, I'm at Worlds or I'm at these big events that, I'm fortunate to go and coach with my guys. Everybody in the stands does jits.
Yeah.
Like if you go to a UFC event, like
Yeah.
now it's a little different. But back in the day, if you went to a UFC event, everybody was there with their fight team.
Yeah.
Everybody there was a fighter. And you get some drunk idiot say something and like 20 dudes stand up with like cauliflower ears. But like it's the same thing when we go to like, Worlds or the jits events. Like you're sitting there and everybody's got cauliflower ears.
Yeah.
Everybody's fucking,
Yeah.
everybody's ready to go and everybody's a high level performer.
Yeah. I mean, dude, CrossFit is just, To me, it's the speed at which they go, and everything's a time standard without the pattern development.
Yeah.
And it's just like, just cringe. Like you see
But,
it, you just cringe. You're
but
like, "Ugh."
it's the model,
So
right?
where do you go from there?
Increase work capacity. Well, so the idea is like, how do you get faster? You either have to increase your movement efficiency or you have to get stronger,
Mhm.
right? And when you watch, Rich Froning and those guys' movement are excellent.
Yeah.
Like those top level CrossFitters, they move so well. Like there's no wasted movement and they're working at these high registers, but for them, it's a low heart rate
Yeah.
because they've trained at such this level.
And people will watch this though that are CrossFit box owners that are very good with what they do.
Yeah.
And they're going to take offense to this. And I'm
No,
not,
well, they shouldn't
yeah,
because
so I'm not
if
talking about them.
yeah, no, I mean, like the magic, and I owned a CrossFit gym, so I'm like I'm the last person to shit on it.
Yeah.
Harry Shaw, who's our good family friend, owns a CrossFit gym. Like we still do Wade's events, which is my cancer charity. I mean, we like the CrossFit community and the CrossFit gym owner, and what they do is where the magic is.
Yeah.
It's not at CrossFit HQ. It's not in Glassman's Insanity and all this
That's a
other
great
shit.
point.
It's the people that walk in that don't know any of this that want to be better versions of themselves, and the coach and their ability to like connect with somebody and get them to be a better version of themselves is really what like the magic is.
Absolutely.
And like that's what I love.
We're going to run out of time, but I want to get to Power Athlete.
Okay.
Can I tell me a little bit about it and like what's it's founded on? If you had to sum up the philosophy of Power Athlete, what would that be?
I'll go back to the definition of athleticism. So the ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task. And those primal patterns, like we talked about, that X, Y, and Z axis and the vertical push, horizontal pull, vertical pull, those 7 primal movements in 3 planes of motion, sagittal, frontal, and transverse. That is really what we're looking to do, is foster and develop athleticism using that training. And what I did is I designed the program based upon archetypes. So, Jack Street is just a hypertrophy-based program using, a bunch of different methods that I've come up with. So that's for, because what I realized is that you can train somebody within this model, but I can bias it on one side,
Mhm.
right? If I need to bias muscle, because I remember reading, it was in Zadaskorsky's book. He talked about once you get through the amateur kind of exposure, that novice progression, like where all of a sudden everything works,
Mhm.
it comes, and the analogy he gave is like it comes to a fork in the road. You can either work on greater central nervous system efficiency, or you can increase hypertrophy
Mhm.
because a larger muscle, theoretically, larger cross sectional size of a muscle will support more weight.
Mhm.
So in terms of athletic performance, and so Jack Street's that road.
Mhm.
Field Strong uses a ton of post activation potentiation, the PAP stuff, all the stuff I used, in my playing days. French contrast. We use a lot of like, compensatory acceleration, dynamic movements, Olympic lifting, what you'd see within a more classic strength conditioning template.
Yeah.
Grindstone. I worked with a Fortune 500 CEO who wanted to be the strongest CEO in the world. They needed a flexible program. So Grindstone fits for that kind of like, recovery, this individual. So
So it's a community that can be formed online as well. It's
Yeah,
not an
yeah.
in-person thing.
Yeah, so
That's
we
very
we
cool.
have thousands of people online that follow this program all across the world, and we have certified coaches. So I got that. I developed the Dragon Slayer, which is that I use for the Jits guys, which is a 3-day a week. Does a full body, but uses a lot of like sandbags and kettlebells and task specific tension. And that's kind of funny. All these names um, have like meaning to me in funny ways. Like, so our joke when a dude looked like he put on a bunch of muscle, maybe he was taking drugs or something, like comes back for the summer, be like, fuck, dude, that guy was living over on Jack Street.
That's
Right?
funny.
Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
walk
got
in
you.
and a dude's put on 20 pounds.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
like, oh, he moved on Jack Street. I got him. So
Yeah.
that was a joke. And then
Yeah.
Field Strong was I played with a guy who was, I came in as a rookie in the NFL into the Eagles, and we were in the weight room lifting weights. And I'm a big weight room guy, and they're benching, 400 pounds. And I look over, and this big country fuck's doing like 225,
Yeah.
135, like not real, like barely struggling 225.
But he could express it.
Well,
on the
and then we
field.
go out on the field, and I'm thinking like, "Fuck, dude, I got lined up next to this dude. I'm playing left tackle. I got this hayseed over here, barely bench 225." All of a sudden, he sets back and goes, boom, and hits this dude and like cleans him off of his feet, throws a dude into me, and I'm like, "Fuck, this dude's like King Kong."
Yeah.
So I slipped up next to him at meal, and I was like, "What gives? You're benching 225," and he's like, "Oh, I never really lifted weights," with the Southern accent, which Southern accent on a woman sounds great on a dude. It makes him sound like kind of a tool. He's
Especially
like,
if they're your doctor.
yeah. So he goes, "Oh, I never really lifted weights." But he goes, "We used to throw 300-pound hay bales."
Yeah.
And
Power exercise, expression of strength through the
yeah,
ground.
and he goes, doing field work just felt like a lot more similar to playing football.
Yeah.
And he goes, and then he talked about, being field strong,
Mhm.
weight room strong and field strong. So that was one of our programs.
Yeah.
Dragon Slayer came because during COVID, my wife sent me a pretty cool like post where she said, it was a quote that somebody came up with. We never found out who said it, which said, don't ever apologize for raising dragon slayers in a time where there are real dragons.
Yeah, for sure.
And which is wild is I got a bunch of tattoos that you can't see. And it's actually two dragons and two samurais embroiled in a battle. And it was kind of this, I was born in the year of the dragon. And I was in college, I read all of this stuff on Bushido. And I became
Yeah.
obsessed with like the samurai's dedication to excellence and precision.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking that if I could attain some form of Bushido and, read the Book of Five Rings and, all of that, that if I could take that same systematic approach to football, like what could be accomplished. And so when I went in and got the tattoos, I was like, well, I was born in the year of the dragon. So there's this kind of like fire dragon dichotomy and this, and that's the tattoos I have. So my wife sends me this quote, and I was like, and the other problem too is or not problem, but I've made uh, this this statement numerous times whenever, guys have come worked for me and have kind of like gone on to new places. I always say, they need a new dragon to slay. They need
Yeah.
to go out and slay their own dragons.
Yeah.
So I've been saying that for years. Like,
Yeah.
you need to go out in the world and slay your own dragon.
So basically,
And
the
so
premise of that is like very busy
Yeah.
people.
Yeah,
that need-
so the Dragon Slayer's 3 days a week, and that's
Yeah.
the one that, because the guys I was training were rolling 18 times a week.
Yeah.
They're doing 2 or 3, sessions. They needed a training program, so that kinda fits.
Yeah.
And then we got, I'm gonna butcher some of the other ones, but yeah, but they all fit within different archetypes
Yeah.
where for specific individuals where, hey, this is the need for it. We have a program, Hammer, when we were doing all that work with the 18th Airborne
Yeah.
Corps. So
Yeah,
we were
yeah.
in contracting for 2 years to bring, power
So
athlete
more
systems.
tactical in nature.
Yeah, actually, it's wild. A bunch of, like, woodland firefighters guys fight
Yeah,
it, right?
totally,
Which,
yeah.
has a run template. It's a little
Yeah.
bit longer, has sprint, and I was trying to balance a bunch of the, 10th Mountain guys and some of those like, those guys like it.
I was
Um,
part of 10th Mountain.
were you?
Climbed to
Oh, yeah?
glory, baby. Yeah. Yeah. For
Yeah,
a while. Yeah.
Yeah, I just talked to a guy from 5th Group the other day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that was kind of more like a strength template for those guys.
Yeah.
I talked to a guy that was a woodland firefighter, out in Nevada who his whole crew uses it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And so, what I like for programming, I just looked at like who are the individual that would need this and what's the demand of this guy,
Yeah.
and then I just kind of like categorized them for it. And it's been, we have a bedrock program for the beginners, and then once they get in, so it gives different ways.
Awesome.
But it was just basically like there is no one size fits all,
Exactly.
and you have a specific need. So if these needs fit for you, then I'm happy to have you, and if they don't, then we'll help you find something better.
Exactly. Like there's no programs right for
No,
everybody.
no, and I
Nor
and,
should there be.
and yeah, and like, it shouldn't be.
Mhm.
And the problem is we got stuck in this idea of muscle confusion and constantly varied.
Mhm.
And the problem is that like all that means is like, the man that sits on every seat sits on no seat.
Yeah.
Like here are the patterns. Now you need to get really good at them and then work on combining
That's
these
so
in that
true.
chunking. And it doesn't seem complex to me.
Yeah. Basically, it's when it boils down, it's not complex. It's the applications sometimes that get a little bit
But to go back
confused.
to that quote, because I want to finish that. So Greg and I are sitting there and we were talking about marketing and how you sell this thing to the masses. And he felt that the genetic and the adaptation and all these things of athleticism was such a high watermark that it was such a tip of the spear that it was only for like elitists in the top at the ivory tower that increased work capacity and this ability to train people to be fit was a much bigger audience that even though everybody wanted to be powerful,
Mhm.
it was easier to sell them on this idea of elite work capacity and this because it was quantifiable, it was measurable.
Mhm.
Now, if strength and power, where they now all of a sudden they have to train and then go out and do a sport.
Mhm.
What if you don't do a sport? What if you don't do this? I mean, so it was more about a marketing for his ability. I mean, how do you sell this thing to 13,000
So
gyms and
Glassman wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what he was talking
yeah,
about, what he was doing,
yes,
who he was selling it to, and why he.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we had as we were having this conversation, he was on like his 12th beer, and he ended up passing out and like pouring the beer on himself. And I had a moment: do I snap a picture and keep that? And I just decided not to take a picture because I wouldn't want nobody to take that picture. So
Yeah.
I have forever had respect for people that have respect for me. The problem is that with the success of what we were doing, it was good and people liked it. And instead of bringing it into the house and saying, you know what, you're doing good stuff, kid,
Yeah.
let's grow this.
It threatened him.
All they
Yeah.
did was they threatened. And at that point, it was knives out. And I dealt with literally the fucking craziness of CrossFit and this like torturous, like backstabbing, like every moment I saw them, I felt like they were talking shit deal. And I'm making them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year,
Yeah.
you know, hundreds of, a lot of money.
Yeah.
And they were treating me like I was like been dipped in
When
shit.
something becomes dogma, you have to defend it to the death, and
Yeah.
then you lose reason.
But what was great about Power Athlete, it's fostering and developing athleticism, right? Like athleticism is on a, and they also talked about this too. Like, they talked about that fitness spectrum. It was really it really wasn't a spectrum. It was more of or they talked about the fitness continuum. It was more of a spectrum. But like the idea of you moving, you can move across an entire lifetime of athleticism. You can be more athletic. I saw it happen today. My next door neighbor has a horse riding school and she's in her 60s and she rides horses and comes in and trains my wife who also rides horses. And I was watching her in there train and she was like, what this has done for my strength and my balance. I'm a better rider. I'm able to see what we do in the weight room
Mhm.
and the training that we do. And I'm able to apply it to the saddle. And I'm better than I was 10 years ago.
The world just gets easier when you're stronger. The world
Yeah.
becomes lighter, literally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And like to me, that's the win. I'm not
Yeah.
putting her on our clock. I
Yeah.
want to hear like we go out and I'm not interested in the workouts with the guys who work at DEVGRU. I just want to know that they have increased resilience,
Mhm.
that they're more lethal, and they're better versions, healthier versions, more capable versions of themselves. I'm not romanced with like, oh, we did Fran faster in this. And what's crazy, and this is funny that this popped up today because I hadn't thought about CrossFit in years. Like I just I just like the kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about that because I think that there's a lot of magic and there's a lot of business owners that are tied to it. But it's funny because when we go to, Damn Nick and we're at the base and we're like working, at their gym and, working with these guys, the amount of people that come over to me that are like, oh, I've been following Power Athlete. I found it with CrossFit football and this. And I never see or hear anybody be like, oh, I'm doing CrossFit in their training.
Yeah.
Whenever I ask those guys, I mean, it just has really just kind of like people got introduced to it and it just kind of didn't stick. And
It's funny
dudes,
because special operations has evolved. Like they evolved past CrossFit. I saw it. Like they evolved in other areas as well, like how they operate, their TTPs.
Yeah.
And I remember because special operations was really in its current form was in its infancy when the GWAT started,
Mhm.
and they made a lot of mistakes. They're very rudimentary, and it's funny that like CrossFit was tied to that, and then they just kept evolving.
Well, so
you know?
General LaCamera, who was, head of the Rangers, he brought in a whole strength and conditioning template because guys were using CrossFit and getting hurt.
Yeah.
When we were, then he,
When I was there, that's what was
Yeah.
happening. Yeah.
yeah. So then he became head of the 18th Airborne Corps. He brought me in and tasked me for bringing Power Athlete systems to 90,000 troops. And that's what we were in the contracting for 2 years.
It's funny because when I was in regiment, they were just starting to turn that corner.
Mm.
They were changing the nature of the combatives.
Yeah.
They were changing the nature. And now if you go down there and you see their training facility, it's unbelievable. They have evolved so much.
Yeah.
If you don't evolve, you die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, this idea that, when you stay stagnant. And so instead of people arguing, and this is what I think is so funny about you putting that quote out and all these people, you're talking about a conversation that happened like 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we have evolved so past this that like the fact that these people are trying to do
They're hanging on to it.
historical revision. I mean, these people were probably in like high school when this thing happened, right? From these conversations. And what they forget
They don't understand the context of the times.
is that, dude, I showed up, right? When Glassman pitches, I showed up and it was Lauren and Greg who had been divorced for many years. And the whole thing was kind of like played out where they sold to Anthos and the whole deal. But like I showed up and Lauren was pregnant and we sat on the couch and she was there going through everything. And I sat with them and whiteboarded. It was them like in this company and they had like 5 computers and this. I mean,
They're speaking about something they don't have firsthand knowledge.
Nothing.
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Like they're speaking of a time that doesn't that is so far in the past.
It's like when somebody comments on our foreign policy or what our troops did over there and that who's never even been in the military. I'm like, you're speaking of something you have
Yeah.
no clue about.
Yeah. So it just makes me laugh that like they have these like little I call them the brain bugs from like the little like
I know.
from Starship Troopers.
No independent thought.
Yeah, and so they get mobilized the minute that like
Oh, I was shocked. I put it out there. I should have been, but I was like, whoa, this went off. I was
dude,
like,
I was laughing at and I couldn't figure out where all this hate was coming from.
That's funny.
And then I looked and you had tagged me and I went back and looked and I was like, oh shit, this is hilarious. And then they started coming at me and I was like, you know what? Like that was legitimately after we had that conversation, I wrote down, hey, dude, the best trick you ever played was convincing the world that work capacity and athleticism were the
It
same.
is a conscious thing that he did.
Yeah, I have it in my notes. The other one was we fail at the margins of our experience, which I have used so many
Yeah.
times, and I always credit Greg Glassman. He's
Credit where credit is due, man.
yeah. And you know what? You don't. It doesn't diminish you
Yeah.
to give credit. Like I always looked at it like I stand on the
Exactly.
shoulders of giants,
Exactly.
right? I went out to West Side and hung out with Louis. I mean, Charlie Francis and Rafael Ruiz and Todd Rice and Zangus, all these people. Like I'll tell you exactly where all this stuff comes from.
Mhm. Same. I'm with Mass Method. I'm not inventing anything.
Yeah.
I'm not. None of this are original ideas.
Yeah.
I'm trying to like repackage it in a way that's more accessible to people.
And you're curating the content so that people don't make the mistakes that you made.
Exactly. So true, man.
And
That's so
and
true.
like that's what
'Cause
I
we've
told
all
him.
made those mistakes.
Yeah, dude, use me as a model. Don't make
Yeah.
my mistakes.
Exactly.
My dad, it's funny. My dad's been gone almost 7 years, and I quote him and think about him all the time. I
Same.
miss him every single day. But he said, he goes, if you got to make every mistake yourself, you're gonna have a hard fucking life. It's a smart man, an intelligent man that can learn from the mistake of others.
That's so
And he's
true.
like, so you can either, and I remember you make mistakes, I fuck things up or whatever, and he's like,
My dad liked to use that saying, insanity is doing the same thing over again, expecting a different result.
Albert Einstein.
Same thing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think what happens sometimes, and I think we want to champion people, and you're like, dude, kid, don't make my mistakes, but that's part of being a kid and
Yeah.
a youth, and I see people fuck this thing up all the time, but it's funny that you posted that. I appreciate that you did because I hadn't thought about these,
Yeah.
but it's funny that these guys think that they were there or they know, and I'm like, dude, you weren't there.
Yeah.
I was sitting there with them. I remember these conversations. I literally took notes when I left on my notepad on my iPhone, like, and I have all of the notes of everything he said because at the time I was so impressed that one, this guy created an entire fitness revolution that was global.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, dude, like his impact. So
Yeah.
I like I said, I consult for a billionaire here in Austin. And every time that we get together and I sit down, like to be able to glean some of his ideas and mentorship and what he's done and understand this, it's like you don't get many opportunities like that.
Yeah.
And if at my, at my station in life, if I can't learn and continue to grow, then I just need to fucking lay down and take a dirt nap.
I mean, I give credit to CrossFit. Like, when that first came out, I was very into bodybuilding.
Sure.
It opened my eyes to something else. The necessity to have work capacity,
Yeah.
which is an important skill to have. Just
Yeah.
can't be the basis in the primary measurement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not the be all end all of athleticism.
Well, and at the end of the day, you need to use your training for something that validates you.
Mhm.
Like you create all this fitness, you create all this training, you do all this. What are you doing with this? Are you going skiing? Are you running with your kids? Like go out and use it. Go do jujitsu. I mean,
Mhm.
like the amount of people. Like I had Jocko on the podcast years ago, and I had met Jocko through Dave Castro. So we went to Jocko's gym. We went to dinner. And then it was funny. I had Jocko on the podcast, and at the end, he's like, "You don't remember me?" I'm like, "Yeah, I totally remember you. We went to dinner." But the amount of people that have listened to Jocko and Jordan Peterson and all
Yeah.
this other stuff that are like, if you want to be happy, lift some weights, eat some protein, get some sleep, and do jujitsu. So the amount of guys that I've met that have like listened to
Yeah. I love when
Jocko's
people
message.
simplify happiness, simplify concepts. Too.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny because I like thought, man, that's really a simplistic way, and like um, the Jocko that I met and the Jocko that is like the kind of the, I guess you could say like the perception of Jocko, like the darkness and this, like
Sure.
he like that's the
You have to
image of
cultivate it.
yeah, and he's cultivated it.
Yeah.
But the amount of guys that I know that are like, I listened to Jocko and I started doing jits because one, it gives you a reason to train, a reason to get up, and it gives you community and movement, and like you get to like exactly how good or bad you are. There's no fucking
I
bullshit.
love that BJJ is taking off across the country. It's fantastic, especially here in Austin. It's super popular.
Well, yeah, no, well, this is the epicenter of it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
The best people in the world are here. You got, John Danaher and Gordon Ryan for the new wave guys. I mean, you got Shanji for Six Blades. I mean, the best jiu-jitsu players in the world, Victor Hugo. I mean, these guys are here in Austin.
Yeah.
The B team with, Nicky Rod and Craig Jones. I
Yeah.
mean, like those guys, everybody is so fucking good
Yeah.
and talented in this. I mean, we were at the UFC Fight Pass where, Victor actually fucking smashed the dude. And Lovato, who's up in Oklahoma, he comes down and goes against Craig Jones. Craig heel hooks him in like 12 seconds. And like, he says to him, like, I didn't train for this. I got to heel hook this dude in the first 30 seconds and does it. I mean, so good. And, however you feel about, like Gordon Ryan's kind of a polarizing character, but there's no discounting how good his jiu-jitsu is. I mean, he's world class. And John Danaher, who I met with Shanji, fucking next level, dude. I mean, that guy is a savant for being able to teach in this. I mean, Gary Tonin, I mean, it's really for jiu-jitsu. I mean, this is the epicenter of this.
Yeah.
The funny part is when you get online and you kind of talk to people about jits, their experiences are a little different than mine because I train with like 10 or 12 Brazilians.
Yeah.
And they're like legitimate killers that are in this country because they're good at
Yes.
jujitsu, and this is their path to like,
Yeah.
visas and citizenship and this. I mean, so these guys are like not hobbyists, like they are professional jujitsu guys. And you show up and, these are the guys I train with in at jits, and they're the guys that come train with us at the gym.
Yeah.
And I've just been very fortunate to like, have them as adopted family and, call them my kids or my nephews or whatever you want to call them. And they're all really good kids and they're hardworking, and I'm very blessed to have them in my life.
Man, I'm remiss to wrap this up. We have to. But
How long is this? I feel like we're going over
3 hours. But I feel like it could go on for another 20. There's so much more I would love to talk to you about.
Well, we can do another one.
Yeah, I know you're very busy, man, but I would love to have you on.
Yeah.
I know people are going to be very interested. Your depth of knowledge, the topics that you can talk on, can go on forever. And I just hate to wrap it up so abruptly.
Well, dude, thank you for having me. But we'll definitely open it up to do another one. I'd love to. As you know, I'm like not a talker, but no, I mean, it's always fun to have, intellectually stimulating conversations with people that are curious and interested. And I do appreciate the fact that you did a little research. I've been on podcasts and they're like, so tell me about themselves.
Yeah.
And then you get into like 10 minutes and the person did no research on you.
Yeah.
And so when I do podcasts, I try to have a fairly high level of readiness on the individual so we can have a nuanced discussion. And I did appreciate that you threw that thing out. Hopefully I can pick up a few followers on, you're crushing in the social media game. And
I feel like I lost all my CrossFit followers, but
dude, the content you put out is fucking engaging and it's interesting. A lot of it, I'm like, I don't even know where the fuck you came up with this. You're over there just probably making shit up. But I think it's great. And dude, I appreciate you throwing that out there because it was a lot of humor and laughing with my wife before I came here. I'm like, check this out. And because she was there every step of the way.
Yeah.
And she remembers kind of the craziness in this and the whole deal. And she's like, oh man, I forgot about these people.
They won't forget about you now.
No, we're in it. So thank you.
Hey brother, I appreciate you so much. Super grateful to get down to have the opportunity to sit down and get to talk to you, man.
Thank you.
I feel like I could pick your brain for months and months and learn so much from you. So
please do now that we're friends. But if anybody's interested, just powerathletehq.com at John Welbourn, or you can just click on one of his posts. And but yeah, man, I'd love to reciprocate the favor and have you on Power Athlete Radio.
Oh, dude, I would love to come on.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review, and tell your friends.